Chapter 1: Landfall. The onyx-glass interceptor cut through the waves like a thrown knife. Salt spray, thick as slush, slammed against the armored windscreen. Inside, the world was a cacophony of engine roar, percussive water impacts, and the hiss of hydraulics. 4 figures were strapped into crash seats, their forms bulky and unnatural in matte black combat armor. A 5th seat, empty, rattled in its harness. Javier Holt, Vulture 1, watched the island grow on the forward display. It was a jagged tooth of rock clawing its way out of a furious gray sea. Atop it, the Ethelberg Research Facility was a series of low, geometric shapes, a sterile scar on the landscape. Rain lashed the display, distorting the image into a watercolor of impending violence. Status report. Holt's voice was a flat command, cutting through the noise via their internal comms. Navigation is green. Approaching sea cave ingress point. 5 minutes out. Keiko Ishida, Vulture 2, did not remove her eyes from the trio of screens in front of her. Her fingers danced across the consoles, monitoring the boat's systems and the storm's chaotic patterns. Hostile weather is our best cover, Commander. Facility sensors won't pick us out of this mess until we are inside their perimeter. Weapon systems hot. Gunnar Magnusson, Vulture 3, grunted from the port side. He patted the stock of the large weapon secured beside him, an incendiary cannon nicknamed the Furnace. Let's hope we get to use the heavy stuff. I hate carrying it for nothing. This is a retrieval and sanitation ox, not a street brawl, Holt reminded him without turning his head. We go in quiet, we secure the package, and we get out before we light the fuse. Clear. Crystal, Magnusson rumbled, the word dripping with disappointment. Across the aisle, Dr. Lena Haddad, Vulture 4, remained silent. Her helmet was off, revealing a severe face and dark eyes that scanned the schematics on her personal data slate. She was Corporate Science Division, not a soldier, but her presence was non-negotiable. She was here to verify the data and the nature of the threat. She looked up, her gaze meeting Holt's in the reflection on the screen. He saw a clinical curiosity there, a professional detachment that he found more unsettling than Magnusson's bloodlust. The rookie, Cole Jensen, Vulture 5, swallowed hard. The motion was audible over the comms. Commander, any final intel on projected resistance? The manifest lists 112 personnel, Holt said, his voice unchanging. Corporate designation, non-viable. They are a biological contaminant. You will not engage in conversation. You will not hesitate. You will treat every living thing on that island as a target. The mission is to retrieve Dr. Vinter's research. Everything else is an obstacle. A 5th voice, thin and devoid of static or warmth, entered their comms. It was the voice of Mr. Finch, the mission overseer, a man they had never seen. Acknowledged, Vulture 1. The package is priority. Your team's extraction is secondary to its retrieval. Do you understand? We understand, Finch, Holt replied, a cold anger tightening his jaw. Vulture out. He cut the external channel. He hated Finch. He hated the corporate mandate that valued a hard drive over the lives of his team. The interceptor slowed, its engines shifting to a near-silent hum as it entered the lee of the island. A massive fissure in the cliff face loomed, a dark mouth promising shelter from the storm. Ishida guided the craft into the sea cave. The transition was abrupt. The roar of the wind and rain vanished, replaced by the gentle lapping of water and the deep, resonant hum of generators. The cave was enormous, artificially widened and smoothed. Banks of floodlights cast a sterile white glare over a concrete docking bay and a set of massive, sealed blast doors. The air smelled of ozone and brine. It was pristine. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies, no blood. Docking complete, Ishida announced, her voice a fraction tighter than before. We are in. Ox Jensen, secure the ramp. Hatted with me. Ishida, stay on the boat and run a system sweep of the facility. Find me a path to the primary research lab, Sector Gamma 7. Holt unstrapped himself, his boots hitting the deck with a solid metallic clang. He picked up his pulse rifle, the weapon feeling like a natural extension of his arm. Magnuson and Jensen moved with practiced efficiency, deploying the ramp onto the concrete dock. The air that hit them was cold, sterile, and carried a faint, antiseptic scent, like a hospital where no one had been sick for a long time. Holt and Haddad followed them out, weapons raised, scanning the cavern. Empty. Silent, save for the generator hum. "Commander," Ishida's voice came over the comm. "I am in their system. Security is offline. No active alerts, no quarantine protocols. Life support is nominal facility-wide. Internal cameras are active, but there are no motion alerts. It's like they switched off the lights and went home." "They didn't go home," Haddad said softly, her eyes fixed on the blast doors. Holt nodded towards the control panel next to the immense doors. "Jensen, get that open." The rookie moved quickly, his training taking over. He interfaced his wrist-mounted device with the panel. A few seconds of code scrolled across his screen. "Security protocols are disabled. Opening the door now." With a heavy hiss of hydraulics, the multi-ton blast doors began to part, revealing a long, brightly lit corridor beyond. It was made of the same white, sterile material as the rest of the facility. It too was empty. "Vulture Squad on me. We move in a file formation. Jensen on point. Ox, you have our 6. Holt led the way through the doors, his rifle sweeping from side to side. Every sense was on high alert. The silence was the most unnerving part. A facility that once housed over 100 people should have noise. A distant conversation, a clattering tray, the hum of a floor cleaner. There was nothing. They moved through the first corridor, their armored boots the only sound. They passed laboratories with large glass windows. Inside, equipment was neatly arranged. Data slates sat next to keyboards. A coffee mug rested on the edge of a desk, a dark ring of dried liquid at its bottom. Holt paused, peering into one of the labs. A man in a scientist's white coat stood in the center of the room. Jensen flinched, raising his rifle. Target sighted. "Hold your fire," Holt commanded, his voice sharp. He studied the man. He was not moving. He was simply standing, his back to them, facing a blank wall. He was perfectly still. "Haddad, your analysis." Haddad moved up beside him, her own data slate raised. She zoomed in on the figure through the glass. No visible signs of trauma. Posture is rigid. He appears passive. As she spoke, The man's head turned slowly, unnaturally, without any movement in his shoulders. It rotated until he was looking directly at them. His eyes were open, glassy, and completely devoid of expression. There was no recognition, no fear, no anger. It was like looking at a mannequin. Then in the lab across the hall, another figure turned its head in the exact same manner, and another further down the corridor. One by one, the silent occupants of the facility, the watchers, turned their vacant gaze upon Vulture Squad. They did not move to attack. They did not speak. They simply stared. "What are they doing?" Jensen whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "They are observing," Haddad replied, her own voice low and clinical, though a new tension lined her face. "Their coordination is perfect." "They are targets, nothing more," Holt stated, forcing the cold professionalism into his tone. "We have our route. Ishida, are you seeing this?" "Affirmative, Commander. I am tracking approximately 30 individuals on the cameras between your position and the first stairwell. All passive, all watching you." "Keep moving," Holt ordered. They proceeded down the hall, a gauntlet of silent, staring faces. The synchronized turning of heads followed their progress. It was a deeply unnerving experience, a violation of natural human behavior. It felt like walking through a wax museum where the exhibits were alive. They reached a junction, a wider area with doors leading to a cafeteria and residential quarters. More watchers stood in the open space, arranged in a loose, almost geometric pattern. Holt's training screamed at him that this was an ambush, a kill zone, but nothing happened. The figures remained motionless, their eyes tracking the squad's every move. "Ishida, I need a secure room. A place to establish a forward command post for a few minutes," Holt said, his eyes constantly scanning. "There is a security nexus one level up, 30 meters from your current position. Reinforced walls, independent power source." "That's our target. Let's go." Holt motioned for them to take the west corridor. They passed the last of the silent watchers in the junction. As they cleared the area, Holt glanced over his shoulder. The watchers' heads had not turned away. They continued to stare at the spot where the squad had just been. They reached the door to the security nexus. It was a heavy, bank vault-like circular door. Jensen once again interfaced with the controls. "Opening now." With a quiet whir, the door slid open. The room was dark, filled with banks of dead monitors. Holt swept the interior with the light on his rifle. Empty. "Clear," he announced. "Get inside. Ishida, seal the door behind us." "Copy, Commander," sealing the door. The team filed into the dark room. As Magnussen stepped through, he hesitated, looking down the corridor they had come from. "Commander, you should see this." Holt moved to his side. The watchers in the junction were now moving, not towards them. They were turning with the same slow, deliberate motion to face the doors of the residential quarters. They were arranging themselves into new, precise lines, as if preparing for an inspection. Their attention was no longer on the squad. It was on something else. Before Holt could process the new information, the heavy security door behind them hissed shut, plunging them into absolute darkness for a second before their helmet-mounted lights kicked in. painting the room in overlapping beams of white. Ishida, what was that? Why did their behavior change? Holt demanded. I don't know, Commander. My sensors are not picking up any other life signs in your vicinity. According to the schematics, you are alone on that level. A sharp metallic click echoed through the secure room. It was loud in the oppressive silence. It was the sound of a lock engaging, but it hadn't come from their door. Ishida's voice was suddenly strained. Commander, that was not me. I did not initiate that door sequence. The system shows a manual override was just triggered. From where, Ishida? From where? Holt's voice was dangerously low. A pause, then Ishida's reply, laced with a new kind of dread. From inside the control room you just cleared. Chapter 2: Asymmetric Engagement. A heavy silence descended upon the security nexus. The four soldiers stood in a tight diamond formation, rifle lights cutting cones through the dusty darkness. The air was stale, thick with the scent of cold electronics and ozone. The only sound was their own breathing, amplified and mechanical through their helmet comms. Report. Holt's command was a blade in the quiet. The door is locked, Jensen stated, his voice tight. He was running a hand over the smooth, seamless metal. Hard sealed. No external panel on this side. It's a maglock military grade. Ishida, can you override? Holt asked, his gaze fixed on the door as if he could melt it with his stare. Negative, Commander. Ishida's voice was tinny, strained. The command didn't come through the network. It was a local bypass. Someone physically activated the emergency lockdown from the panel outside, the same panel Jensen just used. Magnuson let out a low growl. But the room was empty. We swept it. He's right, Jensen added, his light tracing the corners of the ceiling. There was nowhere to hide. It was a clean room. It was not empty, Haddad said, her voice a low, analytical murmur. She was examining the banks of dead monitors. They are not someone. They are a system. The watchers we passed must have relayed our position and intent to another operative. Operative, Magnuson scoffed. They're corpses on their feet. They don't operate anything. You are thinking of them as individuals, Ox, Haddad countered, turning to face him. Her light illuminated the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. That is a mistake. They are a network, a hive. What one sees they might all understand. Holt cut through the speculation. Enough. Ishida, forget the door. Find us another way out. Schematics, ventilation, maintenance shafts. I don't care if we have to crawl. Find a way. Working on it. Holt swept his light across his team. Jensen was jumpy, his rifle moving at every imagined sound. Magnuson was a coiled spring of aggression, his knuckles white where he gripped his weapon. Haddad was outwardly calm, but her breathing was too controlled, her focus too intense. They were rattled. He was rattled. His plan, his control had evaporated in the first 30 minutes of the operation. The enemy was thinking, adapting. It was using their own protocols against them. Commander, Ishida's voice crackled. I have something. There's a service duct in the floor. It's a tight squeeze, but it connects to the primary maintenance crawlspace one level below. From there, you should have access to the medical wing. Give me the location. Jensen found the panel, a meter-square plate bolted to the floor. Magnusson used to pry bar from his pack, the screech of metal on metal echoing loudly in the enclosed space. It sounded like a scream. Once the bolts were off, it took both men to heave the heavy plate aside, revealing a dark, square hole. A rusty ladder descended into blackness. "Smells like rust and decay," Jensen muttered, peering down. "It's our only way," Holt said. "I'll take point. Jensen, you follow me. Haddad, then Ox on the rear. Maintain a 5-meter spread. Lights on full spectrum. Report anything that isn't a rat or a pipe." Holt swung himself onto the ladder and began to descend. The air grew colder, damper. The clean, sterile scent of the upper levels was gone, replaced by a thick, metallic tang and the smell of mildew. His light cut a swath through a maze of pipes, conduits, and thick bundles of fiber-optic cables that ran like veins through the facility's skeleton. He dropped into the crawl space below. The ceiling was low, forcing him into a crouch. The floor was a metal grill, and through it, he could see the tops of the ceiling panels of the level below them. He was in the space between floors. One by one, the rest of the team joined him. Magnusson, with his size and heavy gear, had the most trouble, his movements filled with scrapes and curses. "Quiet, Ox," Holt hissed over the comm. "This place wasn't built for real men," the big man grumbled back. "Ishida, where are we?" Holt asked, moving forward in a low, painful crouch. "You are directly above the pre-op ward in the medical wing," her voice guided them. "There should be a maintenance hatch 30 meters ahead of your current position." They moved slowly, their lights dancing across the endless pipes. The silence was different here. It felt heavier, older. Dust motes swirled in their beams. A steady drip of water somewhere in the distance was the only sound. "Hold," Holt whispered, raising a fist. He had seen something. A shape nestled in a thicket of cables up ahead. He zoomed in with his rifle's scope. It was a person, or what was left of one. A technician in a gray jumpsuit wedged between two large ventilation ducts. "Haddad, move up." The doctor crawled forward, her light joining his. The body was desiccated, almost mummified. The skin was pulled tight over the bones. The mouth was open in a silent O of surprise or terror. "Time of death?" Holt asked. "Hard to say," Haddad replied, her voice professionally detached as she studied the corpse from a distance. "The low humidity and constant air circulation up here would accelerate mummification. Weeks at least. No obvious signs of violence." She paused. "Wait, look at his hands." Holt focused his scope. The technician's fingers were dug deep into the thick rubber insulation of a power conduit, as if he had been trying to claw his way inside it. He wasn't hiding from something, Holt realized. He was trying to get to something. A low chittering sound from behind them made them all freeze. Jensen spun around, rifle raised. What was that? "Sounded like rats," Magnusson said, though his posture suggested he did not believe it. "Keep moving," Holt ordered, his unease growing. "Double time." They found the hatch, another square plate in the floor grill. Holt gestured for Jensen to check it. The rookie knelt, his light shining down. "It opens into a storage closet," Jensen reported. "Looks clear." I'm not picking up any life signs in that room, Ishida confirmed. Go, Holt said. We descend in the same order. Holt dropped through the hatch, landing softly in the small, dark closet. It was filled with shelves of medical supplies, sterile packages of gauze and synth flesh. The others followed. Once Magnussen was through, Holt sealed the hatch above them. The closet door opened into a long, white corridor of the medical wing. It was identical to the one in the upper levels, and it was just as silent. All right, we are back on track, Holt said. Ishida, confirm our path to Sector Gamma. Continue down this hall for 50 meters. Take the service elevator on the left. It should take you directly to the Gamma sector sublevel. They moved out, falling back into formation. The medical wing was a ghost town. Operating theaters stood ready, their complex machinery gleaming under the cold lights. Recovery rooms were pristine, the beds made with crisp white sheets. In one room, a child's teddy bear sat on a pillow, its button eyes seeming to watch them pass. Commander, Jensen said, his voice hushed. He was on point and he had stopped, his rifle aimed down the corridor. Movement, top of the stairs, far end of the hall. Holt moved to his side, peering through his scope. A figure stood at the top of a short flight of stairs, partially obscured by shadow. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it stood with a strange, joint-locking stillness. It was not a watcher. Thermal, Holt whispered. Cold, Jensen replied. Same as the others, ambient temperature. What is it doing? Nothing, just standing there. This is our route, Holt said, making a decision. We are not deviating again. We advance. Jensen, stay on scope. Ox, get ready to lay down suppression if it moves. They advanced slowly, their boots making no sound on the polished linoleum floor. The figure remained motionless. As they got closer, its details became clearer. It was one of the facility staff, a doctor by his coat, but his body was wrong. His limbs were too long, stretched as if they had been pulled on a rack. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle. They were 20 meters away when it moved. It did not walk. It dropped, its strange, elongated limbs bending like a spider's. It hit the floor and scrambled down the stairs with a terrifying, fluid speed. It was silent. No footfalls, no scrabbling claws. Just a silent, impossibly fast predator moving towards them. Contact, Holt yelled. Open fire. Jensen's rifle barked, spitting a stream of high-velocity rounds. The bullets ripped through the creature, sending up puffs of desiccated flesh and cloth, but they did not slow it down. This was a Shrike. Magnussen let out a roar and unleashed the furnace. A torrent of white-hot plasma filled the corridor, turning the air to shimmering heat. The Shrike, with a movement that defied physics, launched itself from the floor to the wall, crawling along it like an insect, the plasma licking at the space where it had been a millisecond before. It's on the wall, Jensen shouted, his fire tracking the creature. Another one dropped from a ceiling panel behind them. Rear guard, Holt bellowed, spinning and firing. The second Shrike was on Magnussen before the big man could turn. Its long, bony fingers, sharp as scalpels, tore through the gaps in his armor, gouging deep into his shoulder. Ox screamed, a sound of rage and pain, and swung the heavy cannon like a club, smashing the creature against the wall. It crumpled, but immediately began to stir. The first shrike launched itself from the wall, directly at Haddad. Holt saw the movement in his periphery. There was no time to aim. He shoved Jensen aside, raised his rifle, and fired a sustained burst. The bullet stitched a line across the creature's chest. It tumbled in midair, landing in a heap at Haddad's feet. It lay still. The one Magnusson had hit was getting up. Holt put 2 rounds into its head. It collapsed and did not move again. Silence returned, thick and ringing. The air was filled with the smell of cooked air from the plasma and the coppery scent of Magnusson's blood. "Ox report," Holt demanded, moving to the wounded soldier. "I'm fine," Magnusson growled, but he was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "The thing just scratched me." Haddad was already there, her medic kit open. "Let me see." She cut away the torn fabric of his undersuit. 4 deep gashes ran from his collarbone to his bicep. "It's deep, but the armor held against the worst of it. No arteries appear severed." "Commander," Ishida's voice was frantic over the comm. "I'm picking up multiple new contacts. They are converging on your position. Fast. They are coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floors." "They were hurting us," Holt said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "The locked room, the crawl space. It was all to funnel us into this kill box." "We need to move." "Now," Haddad said, slapping a quick seal bandage over Magnusson's wound. "That elevator is our only option." "Go," Holt ordered. "Jensen, take point, I'll cover the rear." They ran. Jensen sprinted for the elevator doors at the end of the hall, hammering the call button. Haddad helped the wounded Magnusson, who was now stumbling slightly. Holt walked backwards, his rifle scanning the corridor, the ceiling, the floor. He saw them, more shrikes emerging from the shadows, not running but flowing. Their movements were coordinated, a pack of silent predators. They were flanking, using the doorways and side corridors to box the squad in. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. "Inside," Jensen yelled, holding the door. Haddad and Magnusson scrambled in. Holt provided cover fire, driving the creatures back for a precious second. Then he turned and sprinted for the elevator. He was almost there when he saw it. In an open doorway to a recovery room, a new figure appeared. It was dressed in the uniform of a facility security guard. It held a pistol, aimed not at Holt but at its own head. It was a perfect pantomime of a suicide. It was a distraction, a mimic. Holt's training screamed at him to ignore it, but his eyes were drawn to the motion for a fraction of a second. It was all the time a shrike needed. It burst from a darkened room on his left, its clawed hand reaching for his head. Holt twisted, firing from the hip. The bullet went wide. The creature's claws raked across his helmet, the impact staggering him. His vision flared with static. He stumbled, falling through the elevator doors just as they began to close. The doors hissed shut, cutting off the silent, advancing horde. Inside the small metal box, the 4 members of Vulture Squad collapsed against the walls, gasping for air. Magnusson was bleeding freely. Holt's helmet was scarred, the HUD flickering erratically. Jensen was pale, his hands shaking. They think, Haddad whispered, her voice filled with a terrible awe. They strategize. This is not a mindless plague. The elevator began its descent, a slow, quiet journey into the heart of the island. They were alive. They had survived. But they were no longer the hunters. They were prey, trapped in a cage with a predator of unimaginable intelligence. And they were going deeper into its lair. Chapter 3: The Asphodel Logs. The descent was unnervingly smooth. The only sounds in the elevator car were Magnussen's labored breathing and the quiet hum of the machinery. Holt wrenched his damaged helmet off, tossing it to the floor with a clatter. Cold, recycled air hit his face. He ran a hand over his crew-cut hair, his fingers finding a shallow gash on his temple where the shrike's claw had nearly breached the helmet's seal. "Status Ox," he said, his voice raw. "It's a scratch," the big man grunted, leaning heavily against the wall. His face was pale under the harsh elevator lights. The quick seal bandage Haddad had applied was already dark with blood. "It's more than a scratch," Haddad corrected, her tone sharp. She was examining the wound again, her brow furrowed. "The bleeding isn't slowing as it should, and your skin around the lacerations is discolored." Magnussen glanced down. A faint, purplish-gray mottling was spreading out from the edges of the gashes, like ink bleeding into paper. "What is that?" "A reaction, maybe to an anticoagulant on the creature's claws, or maybe the prion itself has necrotizing properties." She looked at Holt. "I need to get him to a sterile environment and analyze his blood. If he's infected, we have a serious problem." "We have a serious problem either way," Holt shot back, his mind racing. They were wounded, trapped, and heading deeper into enemy territory. Their mission plan was in tatters. "Ishida, where does this elevator lead?" "It opens into the primary observation chamber for Gamma 7, came the reply. "It's a secure area, designed for monitoring hazardous experiments. Schematics show it has its own atmospheric controls and a reinforced blast door. It should be defensible." "For how long?" Jensen asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was staring at the floor indicator, watching the numbers descend. No one answered. The elevator slowed to a gentle stop. A soft chime announced their arrival. With a hydraulic hiss, the doors opened onto a scene of controlled chaos. They were in a semicircular room, dominated by a massive, triple-paned observation window that looked down into a sprawling laboratory below. Desks with multi-screen computer consoles were arranged in tiers. Papers were scattered across the floor. A data slate lay shattered by an overturned chair, and a cold, half-empty mug of coffee sat on one of the consoles. This room had been evacuated in a hurry. "Clear the room," Holt commanded, his rifle already up. Jensen moved left, Holt right. The room was empty. A single blast door, presumably the exit to the rest of the Gamma sector, was set in the far wall. "Seal the elevator," Holt ordered. Jensen hit a control panel and a heavy metal shutter slid down over the elevator doors, locking with a series of solid thuds. For the moment, they were safe. Haddad see to Ox. "Jensen, check that blast door, see if you can secure it further. I want to talk to Ishida." Holt moved to the main command console. Static, talk to me. What's the situation topside? Not good, Commander, Ishida said. They know where you are. The Watchers on this level have all reoriented. They are converging on the Gamma-7 blast door, and they are bringing things with them. What things? Equipment, heavy plating from the machine shop, welding torches. They are not trying to break the door down, they are fortifying it, sealing you in. A cold knot formed in Holt's stomach. They were being entombed. Haddad had helped Magnussen out of the upper part of his armor. The discoloration on his shoulder had spread. His skin was cold to the touch. She was drawing a blood sample, her movements swift and precise. "Commander," Jensen called out from the blast door. "The locking mechanism is solid, but there's a problem. The external controls have been bypassed. We can open it from this side, but we can't lock it." "Which means they can open it from theirs," Holt finished, the trap closing tighter around them. He slammed his fist down on the console. They were penned in, with a wounded man who might be a ticking biological time bomb, and an army of silent, intelligent monsters waiting for them on the other side of a door they could not lock. Ishida, the mission objective. Vulture's research. It's in the lab below us, correct? Affirmative. The primary server is down there, but the only access is via a decontamination chamber connected to this room. The door is right next to the main blast door. Holt's eyes found it, a small, airtight hatch labeled Decon 3. It was their only path forward, a path that led directly into the heart of the main laboratory. He looked through the massive observation window. The lab below was dark, save for the blinking status lights on rows of servers and containment units. He could see no movement. "Haddad, how is he?" "His blood pressure is dropping and his heart rate is erratic," she reported, her eyes fixed on the screen of a portable medical scanner. She had plugged Magnussen's blood sample into the device. "The analysis is running now. Initial readings show a foreign protein chain. It's incredibly complex. It's not just attacking his cells, it's rewriting them." Magnussen tried to stand, his face a mask of pained confusion. "I feel cold, my thoughts are slow." "Stay seated, Gunnar," Haddad ordered, her voice firm. Holt turned away. He could not afford to think of Magnussen as a man anymore. He was a liability, a potential threat. The corporate directive echoed in his mind, primary objective above squad preservation. "Ishida," he said, his voice low and hard. "The data. You said you bypassed their system. Can you access Vulture's server from my console?" "Let me try." A few moments of silence passed. "Negative. The Gamma-7 server is on a closed network, air-gapped from the main facility grid for security. The only way to access the data is to physically connect a terminal to the server rack itself. You have to go down there." Of course, it was never simple. The medical scanner beside Haddad beeped, a final, definitive tone. She looked at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. "Commander," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "It's the prion, it's in his blood. The protein is self-replicating at an exponential rate. It's targeting his neural pathways first. It's deconstructing his cognitive functions." Magnuson looked up, his eyes glassy. A single nonsensical phrase slipped from his lips. The furnace is cold. How long does he have? Holt asked, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. I don't know, Haddad confessed, her composure shattering. This isn't a disease, it's a biological terraforming agent. It's not killing him, it's changing him into one of them. As if on cue, a new sound began. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It came from the blast door. Jensen spun around, rifle aimed. They're here. But the sound was too light for an attack. It was a patient, methodical tapping. Holt approached the door, listening. Tap, tap, tap. They're not trying to get in, he realized. They're signaling. Or they're waiting, Haddad whispered. Waiting for him to turn. Waiting for their new brother to open the door for them. Holt looked from the door to the vacant, confused expression on Magnussen's face. The mission had a terminal cancer. He had to cut it out. Haddad, Jensen, prepare to move into the lab, he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. Grab what you need. We are retrieving that data. What about Ox? Jensen asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. We're not just leaving him. Holt did not answer. He simply drew his sidearm. He walked over to Magnussen. The big man looked up at him, a flicker of his old self returning to his eyes. He saw the pistol in Holt's hand. He understood. He nodded slowly. Wait, Haddad said, stepping between them. There's something else. On the console, Ishida must have unlocked it. She was pointing at the main screen, which had flickered to life. It showed a video file directory. Vulture logs. Play the last one, Holt said, his pistol never wavering. Haddad tapped the screen. The tired, serene face of Dr. Marin Vulture appeared, filling the large monitor. The background was the very lab that lay in darkness below them. Her voice, calm and clear, filled the observation room. Log entry 734, she began. The asphodel prion has exceeded baseline projections. Subject Bell's integration is complete. We mistook the silence for a symptom, a failure. We were wrong. She smiled, a faint, beatific expression. It is not a loss of language, it is a new language. The cacophony of individual ego, of fear and greed and desire, it's all gone. There is only we. There is a clarity, a purpose I could never have imagined, a harmony. On the screen, Vinter's eyes flicked to something off camera. Holt's blood ran cold. He recognized the look. It was the same vacant, observant stare of the watchers. They learned so fast, she continued, her voice filled with a mother's pride. They understand the building systems. They understand threat analysis. The old security protocols are irrelevant because the facility itself is now a part of the collective. Vulture leaned closer to the camera, her eyes seeming to stare directly at Holt, at his team across time. To whoever finds this, you cannot fight a thought. You cannot put a bullet in a concept. You have come here to sterilize, to erase, but you are merely a new stimulus, a problem to be solved. Her smile widened. And we are very, very good at solving problems. The video ended, plunging the screen into darkness. The tapping at the door stopped. A new sound replaced it, a heavy, grating scrape of metal on metal. They were reinforcing the door, just as Ishida had said. They were sealing them in with their dying comrade. Holt looked at Magnusson. The big man's eyes were unfocused again. He was mumbling to himself, his head lolling to one side. The change was accelerating. Then from the massive observation window came a new sound, a soft, wet thud. Holt, Haddad, and Jensen turned as one. Pressed against the other side of the thick glass, staring in at them from the darkness of the lab below, was a face. It was gaunt, pale, its features distorted in a permanent, silent scream. It was one of the Shrikes. It had climbed the sheer wall of the laboratory, and as they watched, another appeared beside it, and another. They were not trying to break the glass. They were simply watching, waiting. The squad was trapped. The exit was being sealed. A monster was in the room with them, and a welcoming party was waiting for them in their only path forward. The trap was not closing anymore. It had snapped shut. Chapter 4: The Long Fall. The faces at the window were the final punctuation on their predicament. Pale, gaunt, and patient. They were not raging beasts trying to smash their way in. They were scientists observing a specimen in a jar. Vulture Squad was the specimen. Inside the observation room, the fragile command Holt held over his team was fracturing. Jensen kept glancing from the looming figures at the window to the slumped form of Magnusson, his rifle held in a white-knuckled grip. Haddad was backing away from Magnusson, her face a mask of clinical horror, her hand resting on the medical kit as if it were a weapon. Holt's pistol remained aimed at Magnusson's head. Every tenet of his training, every brutal lesson learned in corporate sanitation ops told him to pull the trigger. The asset was compromised. Neutralize the threat. Secure the objective. Simple, clean, absolute. But the man slumped in the chair was not just an asset. He was Gunnar Magnusson. He was the man who had dragged Holt out of a firefight in the Caracas slums. The man who told terrible jokes after a mission and shared his rationed protein bars without being asked. The cold logic of the mission was at war with the messy, inconvenient reality of the man. "Commander, you can't," Jensen pleaded, his voice cracking. "He's still in there." "What's in there is a disease wearing his face," Holt countered, his own voice a low growl. "In 10 minutes, maybe less, it will stand up, and it will try to kill us with the same hands that reloaded your magazine for you this morning. It will feel nothing. Do you understand?" Magnusson stirred. His head lifted, and for a breathtaking moment the fog in his eyes cleared. Clarity. It was the last flicker of a dying candle. He looked at the pistol in Holt's hand, then at Jensen's desperate face, and finally at Haddad's fear. "Javier," Magnusson's voice was a rough whisper, but it was his. "Don't let me become one of them." His gaze fell to the incendiary cannon propped against the wall beside him. The furnace. "The cold," he rasped, a tremor running through his massive frame. "Burn it out." Holt understood. It was not an order he could give, but it was a request he could honor, a final act of mercy for a good soldier. He lowered his pistol. Jensen started to protest. "No, Ox, we can." "Shut up, kid," Magnusson grunted, a shadow of his old gruffness returning. He struggled to his feet, swaying. The purplish-gray discoloration had spread across his neck and up to his jawline. He was a man fighting a war on the inside and losing. He staggered towards his weapon, his movements stiff and uncoordinated. "Help him," Holt said to Jensen. The order was quiet but absolute. Swallowing hard, Jensen moved to Magnussen's side, slinging the big man's arm over his shoulder. Together, they stumbled towards the observation window. The Shrikes on the other side of the glass watched their approach, their heads tilting in synchronized, curious arcs. Magnussen leaned heavily against the thick, reinforced glass. He looked out at the silent, watching monsters, then down at the weapon in his hands. He fumbled with the activation sequence, his fingers clumsy and slow. "It's not a bad way to go," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "A big fire." He looked over his shoulder at Holt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Make them pay for the real estate, Commander." Holt gave a single, sharp nod. "Vaya con Dios, Gunnar." Magnussen turned back to the window. He deactivated the weapon's safety limiter. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the cannon's core, the air around its muzzle shimmering with heat. The Shrikes outside reacted. Their passive curiosity vanished, replaced by a sudden, frantic energy. They began to claw at the glass, their bony fingers screeching against the reinforced pane. They understood what was about to happen. "Get down," Holt yelled, shoving Haddad and Jensen towards the relative cover of a console bank. Magnussen leaned his forehead against the cool glass, his eyes closing. He pulled the trigger. The world became white light and roaring sound. The furnace did not just fire, it detonated. The failsafe override turned the weapon into a small bomb, its plasma core rupturing in a violent, unrestrained cataclysm. The triple-paned window vaporized. The observation room was ripped apart by a wave of incandescent energy and concussive force. Consoles exploded, sending shrapnel flying. The ceiling buckled. Holt, shielded by the console, felt the heat sear his skin. The shockwave threw him against the back wall, his head cracking against the metal. His ears rang with a deafening tone, and his vision swam with black spots. The eruption was over as quickly as it began. A roaring vacuum sucked the superheated air out of the shattered window into the lab below. A fire alarm, shrill and insistent, began to blare. Holt pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. The observation room was a wreck. The heavy blast door had buckled in its frame. Jensen and Haddad were picking themselves up, dazed but alive. Where Magnussen and the window had been, there was now a gaping, smoking hole, offering a sheer drop into the darkened laboratory 2 stories below. Of Gunnar Magnussen, there was nothing left but a scorched silhouette on the floor and the lingering smell of ozone. "Ishida, report," Holt shouted, his voice hoarse. The alarm was deafening. "Commander, the explosion." It triggered a facility-wide structural alert. The AI is rerouting power, engaging fire suppression systems. Ishida's voice was a panicked buzz in his earpiece. "You have to get out of there. That whole section is compromised." Holt stumbled to the edge of the jagged opening. The fire suppression system in the lab below had activated. A thick, white foam was spewing from nozzles in the ceiling, rapidly filling the cavernous space. The Shrikes had been incinerated or blown away, but the lab was now a rising sea of chemical foam. "The data drive," Holt yelled over the noise. "We have to get down there before it's submerged." "How?" Jensen shouted back, gesturing at the sheer drop. "We make a rope." Haddad was already tearing thick power cables from the wrecked consoles. Her scientific mind had latched onto the new problem, a welcome distraction from the horror. They worked with frantic speed, braiding the heavy cables together. Holt secured one end to a reinforced stanchion that had somehow survived the blast. He tossed the makeshift rope into the abyss. It dropped into the rising foam, which was already a meter deep. "Haddad, you go first," Holt commanded. "Secure the server. Jensen, you're on her 6. I'll cover this position." Haddad did not hesitate. She swung herself over the edge and began to rappel down the cable with surprising skill. Jensen followed a moment later, his youthful face set in a grim mask. Holt stood guard at the hole, his rifle trained on the buckled blast door. The alarm was still screaming, a maddening counterpoint to the hissing of the foam below. He could hear scraping sounds from the other side of the door. They were coming. "I'm down," Haddad's voice crackled over the comm. "The foam is up to my waist, it's thick. Moving is difficult." "The server rack is on the east wall," Ishida's voice cut in. "Look for the green blinking light." Holt watched Jensen land in the foam beside Haddad. They began to slog through the viscous substance, their movements slow and clumsy. "I see it," Haddad said. 50 meters, we can make it." A loud groan came from the blast door. A dent appeared in its center, the metal screeching in protest. They were using something heavy. Holt fired a burst at the dent, the bullets ricocheting with a high-pitched whine. It was a pointless gesture, but he had to do something. "Hurry up," he yelled into the comm. Below, the two figures were struggling through the foam. It was up to their chests now. It was like running in a nightmare. Another impact slammed into the door, louder this time. The door bent inward, its locking mechanisms groaning. "Almost there," Jensen grunted, his voice strained. He was helping to push Haddad forward. Holt saw movement at the far end of the lab on the other side of the foam sea. Figures were emerging from service tunnels that were still above the foam line. Shrikes, dozens of them. They clung to the walls, their pale bodies stark against the dark metal, their heads all turned towards the two struggling humans. They were not attacking. They were waiting. They knew the foam was an obstacle, that it would submerge the squad and their prize. "They're boxing us in," Holt warned. "Haddad, get that data." A final, deafening crash. The blast door was ripped from its hinges, thrown into the wrecked observation room by a hulking shape. It was subject, Grendel. The monstrous boar-bear hybrid was a silent, charging mass of muscle and scar tissue, its eyes glowing with the same cold, vacant intelligence as the others. It lowered its head and charged. Holt opened fire, emptying his magazine into the creature's face. The rounds tore into its flesh, but it barely seemed to notice. It was 3 tons of rage and muscle, a living battering ram. Holt threw himself to the side as the beast thundered past, smashing through the last of the consoles and plowing into the back wall with a ground-shaking impact. "I have it," Haddad's voice screamed in his ear. "The drive is secure." Holt did not have time to reply. The beast was turning, shaking its massive head. Behind it, shrikes were pouring into the room through the ruined doorway. He was out of time. He scrambled to the edge of the hole, took a deep breath, and jumped. The fall felt like an eternity. He hit the foam, and it was like hitting a wall of wet concrete. The impact knocked the wind out of him, the thick, chemical-smelling substance filling his mouth and nose. He was submerged, blind, and suffocating. He fought against the panic, his arms and legs churning, pulling himself upwards. He broke the surface, gasping, spitting out foam. Haddad and Jensen were there, pulling him towards the server rack. It was on a raised platform, a small island in the chemical sea. "We have to go," Jensen yelled, pointing. The foam had stopped rising. The shrikes were now dropping from the walls, landing nimbly on top of equipment and storage containers, creating a network of stepping stones as they closed in. Grendel, upstairs, roared in frustration, unable to follow. "Ishida," Holt sputtered, wiping foam from his eyes. "We are in the lab, we have the drive. We need a way out, now." "There's a hazardous waste disposal chute in the floor, 20 meters north of your position," she replied. "It drops down to the geothermal vents at the base of the facility. It's your only chance." They plunged back into the foam, fighting their way towards the location Ishida had given them. The shrikes were leaping from perch to perch, closing the distance, their movements silent and swift. They were like wolves circling a trio of exhausted caribou trapped in deep snow. They reached the spot, a circular grate in the floor, half submerged in the foam. Jensen tore at it, his fingers finding a release lever. With a hydraulic hiss, the grate opened, revealing a dark, vertical tunnel. A shrike landed on the server rack behind them, launching itself through the air. Holt spun and fired, his rifle slick with foam. The creature was hit in midair and crashed into the white sea. "Go!" Holt screamed. Haddad slid into the chute without a word. Jensen followed. Holt gave one last look at the closing circle of silent, pale hunters. He fired a final, defiant burst, and then threw himself into the darkness of the chute. He fell, tumbling through a pitch-black tube, the screams of the fire alarm, and the silent menace of the lab replaced by the rush of wind, and the echoing scrape of his own armor against the smooth metal walls. It was a long, blind fall into the unknown heart of the island. Chapter 5: The Chorus. The fall ended in a bone-jarring splash. Holt plunged into a pool of lukewarm, mineral-heavy water that filled a rock-hewn cavern. The water was unnaturally clear, illuminated from below by the faint, geothermal glow of fissures in the rock. Steam ghosted across the surface, carrying the scent of sulfur and wet stone. Haddad and Jensen were already there, pulling themselves onto a wide, flat ledge that served as the cavern's floor. Holt followed, his armor feeling twice its weight as he dragged himself from the water. They were in a natural cave system deep beneath the facility, a place of oppressive heat and humidity. The rhythmic hum of machinery was still audible, a deep bass note that seemed to come from the rock itself. "Everyone sound off," Holt gasped, collapsing onto the ledge. "I'm okay," Jensen said, his voice shaky. He had lost his rifle during the fall. "Operational," Haddad replied. She was clutching the data drive, a small, silver rectangle, holding it as if it were a holy relic. She had managed to protect it through the chaos. Holt checked his own gear. His pulse rifle was still slung across his chest, miraculously intact. His sidearm was secure, but his helmet was gone, and their shared comm line was filled with a torrent of static. "Ishida, static, do you read me?" Holt shouted into his shoulder mic. Only static answered. "The rock formations are too dense down here," Haddad surmised. "They're blocking the signal. We're on our own." The reality of their situation settled upon them. They were cut off, deep underground with no map and no support. But they were alive, and they had the objective. "All right," Holt said, forcing himself to his feet. "First things first. We find a defensible position and figure out where we are. Then we find a way back up." The cavern was vast. In the center, a colossal piece of facility machinery rose from the geothermal pool. It was a geothermal converter, a massive, cylindrical structure covered in pipes and heat sinks, designed to power the entire island. It was humming, the source of the noise that permeated the cavern. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they saw that they were not alone. The walls of the cavern were not just rock. They were coated in something else, a thick, pulsating bioorganic mass. It was the growth, a lattice of what looked like veins and muscle tissue, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. It covered nearly every surface, its tendrils wrapped around the geothermal converter like a parasite strangling its host. "My God," Haddad breathed, stepping closer to the nearest wall. "It's not just a fungus. The cellular structure is part neural, part botanical. It's a living network." As she spoke, a low hum started not from the machinery but inside their heads. It was a gentle, pervasive thrum like a distant choir. It was unnerving but not painful. "Do you hear that?" Jensen asked, his hands going to his temples. "It's not a sound," Haddad said, her eyes wide with a terrifying understanding. "It's a signal. We're in the epicenter. This is it. The chorus." The hum intensified, and with it came images, fleeting, intrusive flashes that were not their own memories. Holt saw the sterile white of the lab, not from his own perspective, but from a dozen different angles at once. He saw his own team, small and struggling in the foam, from the cold, analytical viewpoint of the shrikes on the walls. Jensen cried out, stumbling backwards. "Get out of my head!" He was seeing flashes of his family, his childhood home, but the memories were twisted, overlaid with the image of a watcher's blank, staring face. Haddad gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She was receiving a deluge of complex equations, protein folding sequences, the raw, unfiltered scientific logic of the prion itself. It was beautiful, perfect, and utterly alien, a siren song for her scientific mind. "Fight it!" Holt yelled, the command as much for himself as for them. He was wrestling with flashes of his own failures, the faces of soldiers he had lost, the weight of missions gone wrong, all amplified and replayed with a cold, judging clarity. The chorus was a psychological weapon. It found their weaknesses, their fears, their hopes, and it used them to break them down from the inside. The physical attack came next. From the pulsating walls of the growth, figures began to emerge. They were not shrikes. They were something new, something that had been gestating in this hot, dark place. They were the final stage. Their bodies were a horrific fusion of human anatomy and the growth itself. Their limbs were elongated and covered in sinewy tendrils. Their heads were featureless, save for a single, glowing optic in the center of their faces. They were the true choir members, the physical nodes of the hive mind. They moved with a silent, terrifying grace, dropping from the walls into the geothermal pool, their movements causing no ripples. They advanced on the ledge, their single eyes fixed on the small group of humans. "Open fire," Holt roared, the words a desperate anchor in the psychic storm. He raised his rifle and fired. The rounds tore into the lead creature. It staggered, a section of its chest exploding in a shower of phosphorescent fluid, but it did not fall. It kept coming. Hadid, breaking free from the mental assault, drew her sidearm, her shots precise and controlled. Jensen, unarmed, scrambled backwards, his face a mask of terror. The creatures were relentless. For every one they shot down, two more emerged from the walls. Holt's magazine ran dry. He slammed a fresh one in, his hands clumsy under the psychic pressure. The images were getting stronger. He saw Magnussen's face not as a friend, but as a failed specimen, its component parts being analyzed for weaknesses. They were being pushed back, forced into a corner of the ledge. The geothermal converter was at their backs, its heat scorching their armor. There was no escape. "The drive," Hadid shouted over the gunfire, holding up the silver rectangle. "It's what they want." Dr. Vulture wasn't just storing her research on it. She was trying to create a seed, a backup of the core consciousness. The central creature, larger than the others, raised a hand. The others stopped their advance. The mental humming focused, concentrating on Holt, Hadid, and Jensen with an intensity that brought them to their knees. A voice entered their minds. It was not Vinter's. It was a chorus of 100 voices speaking as one, a calm, impossibly ancient, and utterly non-human intelligence. "You carry the word," it resonated in their skulls. "The word is a part of us. Return it." "What do we do?" Jensen cried out, clutching his head. Holt looked at the drive in Hadid's hand, then at the army of monsters before them. They were not just being attacked, they were being communicated with. A negotiation on the most terrifying terms imaginable. The lead creature took a step forward, its hand outstretched. "The vessel is incomplete," the chorus hummed. "Your organic matter and the word you carry will help us achieve stability." It wasn't just the data they wanted, it was them. Their bodies, their minds. They were to be the final ingredients. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the psychic noise, sharp and clear. "Commander Holt, can you read me? I have a signal." It was Ishida. The creatures all flinched, their heads turning in unison towards the ceiling, as if looking for the source of the intrusive, individualistic sound. The mental pressure lessened for a moment. "Ishida," Holt yelled into his mic, "we read you. We are in the geothermal core under heavy assault." "I know, I'm tracking your biosignatures. The explosion must have knocked out one of their signal jammers," she said, her voice a beacon of hope. "I'm trying to slice into the converter's control system. If I can trigger an overload, the resulting energy discharge should disrupt them, but it will also be catastrophic for the facility. The interruption will be dealt with, the chorus stated in their minds, its voice now laced with cold anger. The creatures began to advance again, faster this time. "Do it, Ishida," Holt screamed. "Blow it all to hell." "It's not that simple. I need you to manually disable the 3 primary safety regulators on the converter. I can't bypass them remotely. They're physical overrides." Holt looked at the colossal machine behind them. 3 large panels were spaced around its circumference, each marked with a yellow and black warning symbol. Each one was on the other side of a swarm of advancing monsters. "We can't get to them," Haddad shouted, firing the last bullet from her pistol. The mental assault returned, stronger than ever. The chorus was trying to shut them down. Holt fought against it, his vision blurring. He saw the path to the first regulator. It was suicide. Then he saw Jensen. The rookie was no longer cowering. He was on his feet, his eyes wide with a desperate resolve. He had picked up a heavy metal pipe from the floor. "I'll draw them off," Jensen said, his voice shaking but determined. "You two get to the regulators." "Don't be a fool, kid," Holt grunted, trying to push himself up. "It's the only way," Jensen shouted back. He looked at Holt, a sad smile on his face. "Make it count, Commander." Before Holt could stop him, Jensen let out a raw, defiant scream, a sound of pure, individualistic rage, and charged. He ran not at the creatures but along the ledge, away from Holt and Haddad, drawing the attention of the main group. The creatures, momentarily confused by this illogical, sacrificial act, turned their glowing eyes towards him. Their perfect, logical hive mind struggled to process the concept of a futile, emotional gesture. It bought them the seconds they needed. "Lena, go left, I'll go right," Holt yelled, scrambling towards the nearest regulator panel. He vaulted over a pipe, the heat from the converter blistering his suit. The chorus's attention was divided. He could think again. He reached the panel and tore it open. Inside was a large, red lever. He threw all his weight into it. With a groan of protesting metal, the lever slammed down. Across the converter, he saw Haddad do the same. 2 down. Jensen was cornered, swinging the pipe wildly, keeping the creatures at bay for a few more precious moments. But he was overwhelmed. They swarmed him, pulling him down into a writhing mass of pale limbs and glowing eyes. His screams were cut short. The 3rd regulator was near where Jensen had fallen. There was no way to get to it. "It is over," the chorus hummed, a note of triumph in its voice. "Your sacrifice was meaningless." Holt watched in horror as the creatures began to drag Jensen's body back towards the pulsating wall of growth. Then he saw it, the data drive. Haddad must have dropped it when she went for her regulator. It lay on the ledge, halfway between him and the 3rd panel. The chorus wanted the drive. An idea born of pure desperation sparked in Holt's mind. He scooped up the drive. "Hey," he roared, his voice cracking. "You want this? Come and get it." He did not run at them. He ran towards the geothermal pool, towards the edge of the ledge. He held the drive out over the glowing, superheated water. The creatures stopped. The mental hum became a shriek of alarm. "Do not," the voice commanded. "The word must not be destroyed." "Call them off," Holt demanded, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Pull them back from the last regulator, or I will melt this drive into slag." For a long moment, there was only the hum of the machine and the steam from the water. Then, with a fluid, reluctant motion, the creatures swarming the third regulator pulled back, clearing a path. Holt looked at Haddad, who was staring at him, her face a mixture of terror and disbelief. He gave her a sharp nod. "Lena, now." She understood. She sprinted for the final panel, her movements desperate. She wrenched it open and slammed the last lever down. "They're down, Commander," Ishida's voice screamed in their ears. "The overload is starting. Get out of there. The vents. Get back to the vents." A deep, shuddering groan vibrated through the entire cavern. The geothermal converter began to glow, red light showing through the seams in its casing. The chorus let out a final, psychic roar of pure fury. "You have failed." It was a bluff. Holt knew it. He threw the data drive not into the water but onto the ledge, far away from the edge. As the creatures instinctively scrambled for it, he turned and ran, diving for the disposal chute he and the others had fallen through. Haddad was right behind him. They scrambled up the slick metal walls, finding handholds, adrenaline giving them impossible strength. Below them, the cavern was bathed in a blinding white light. The overload was peaking. The psychic scream cut off, replaced by a physical explosion of unimaginable force. A wave of heat and pressure shot up the chute, blasting Holt and Haddad upwards. A violent, chaotic ascension through the darkness. Chapter 6: The Wreckage. The ascent was a violent, uncontrolled parody of birth. Holt and Haddad were cannonballs of flesh and steel, shot up the disposal chute by the bellowing fury of the geothermal explosion. They slammed through a series of pressure-release baffles that slowed them just enough to prevent their bodies from being pulped. The final impact was a brutal, jarring collision with a containment grate. For a moment, there was only the ringing in Holt's ears and the blackness behind his eyes. He came to with a gasp, the air tasting of burnt plastic and pulverized concrete. He was lying on a twisted mesh of steel, his body screaming a dozen different protests. Below him, the chute was a throat of roaring, orange light that quickly faded back to black, leaving a deep, resonant groan that was the sound of the island's foundations dying. Haddad was a few feet away, pushing herself into a sitting position. Her face was smudged with soot, and a cut over her eyebrow was bleeding freely into her dark hair. She was alive. That was all that mattered. "Status," Holt grunted, the word a painful effort. He rolled onto his side, every muscle protesting. His armor was dented and scored, but it had held. "Multiple contusions," Haddad replied, her voice strained and clinical, a fragile shield against the shock. "Probable concussion, but I'm functional." She looked around, her eyes taking in their new surroundings. The chute must have terminated here, a collection point. They were in what looked like a waste processing center, a large, industrial chamber now torn apart by the force of the blast that had propelled them upward. The containment grate they had landed on was part of a large sorting mechanism, now bent and buckled. Pipes had burst, spraying a foul-smelling liquid across the floor. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting the room in a strobe-like display of shadow and glaring red light. The air was thick with dust. Holt got to his knees, his rifle still clutched in his hand. He did a quick inventory. 1 rifle, 3 magazines. His sidearm, 2 magazines, a combat knife. It was not much to pit against an island of monsters. Hadid had her sidearm, but he doubted she had much ammunition left. The data drive, the entire purpose of their mission, was gone, lost in the inferno below. Jensen, Hadid started, her voice faltering. "He's gone," Holt said, the words flat and final. He could not afford sentiment, not now. "Magnuson is gone. We are all that's left of Vulture Squad." He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. "The mission is a failure. The objective is lost. Our new mission is survival." He fumbled for his comm unit, tapping the receiver. Static, then a broken whisper. "Commander, read me. Vulture 1, are you?" "Ishida," Holt shouted, pressing the unit to his ear. "Static, I read you. We are alive." "Thank God." Her voice was a torrent of relief, broken by static. "The whole island is coming apart, that overload. It caused a chain reaction. I'm reading seismic instability. The structure is failing. You have to get out." "Where are you, Ishida? Are you still at the dock?" "Negative. The sea cave collapsed in the first tremor. I had to take the interceptor out. I'm holding a position 1 click off the southern shore. The landing bay is gone, Holt. There's no way out through the bottom." Holt felt the last of his hopes crumble. "Then how do we get out?" "The roof," she said, her voice fighting the interference. "There's an emergency helipad on the roof of the Central Command spire. It's your only destination. I can't promise. The storm. I can try a pickup." The roof. They were in the sub-levels, possibly 5 or 6 floors below the surface. It was a long way up, through a dying facility filled with enraged creatures. "We're on our way," Holt said. "Keep this channel open as long as you can." He looked at Hadid, who had been listening, her face grim. "You heard her. We're going up." Hadid nodded, her eyes scanning the wreckage around them. "The explosion will have disoriented the hive, crippled their psychic coordination, but it won't have killed them all. The ones that are left will be unpredictable." As if to prove her point, a screech echoed from a darkened corridor leading out of the chamber. It was not the silent, fluid movement of a shrike. It was a pained, furious sound. Holt raised his rifle, aiming into the darkness. A figure stumbled into the strobing red light. It was a shrike, but it was damaged. One of its arms was a mangled stump, and it dragged a leg behind it. It moved in spastic, twitching motions, its head snapping from side to side. The intelligent predator was gone, replaced by a wounded, rabid animal. It saw them, and with another screech it lunged. Holt fired a controlled 3-round burst. The bullets hit the creature's center mass, throwing it backwards into the corridor. It lay there, twitching before falling still. "They're not silent anymore," Hadid observed, her voice low. "The chorus is broken. The singers are just screaming now." "That makes them easier to track," Holt said. "But it also means they've lost their finesse. They'll be driven by pure rage. Let's move before more of them show up." He found a service ladder that led up to a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. It was their best option, a way to bypass the main corridors that would surely be swarming with the frenzied survivors of the hive. The crawl space above was a cramped, hot maze of ductwork and wiring. The facility's groans were louder here, the shriek of stressed metal a constant companion. They moved as quickly as they could, their progress marked by the sound of Holt's rifle scraping against the metal and Haddad's ragged breathing behind him. After what felt like an hour of crawling through the metallic guts of the building, Holt found a schematic panel, its screen cracked but still functional. He wiped the dust away. "We're 2 levels below the surface," he reported, "directly under the residential wing." He traced a line with his finger. "The main stairwell is 50 meters east of our position. If we can get to it, it should lead straight up to the command spire." They found a hatch that opened into a laundry room. They dropped down, landing on piles of neatly folded white lab coats. The room was untouched, a pocket of eerie calm amidst the chaos. A washing machine was still sloshing through its cycle, a mundane sound that was somehow more terrifying than the silence had been. Holt pushed the door open a crack and peered out. They were in a corridor of the residential block. The lights were on but flickering badly. Doors to individual dorm rooms stood open. It was quiet, too quiet. "Something's wrong," he whispered, pulling his head back. "There should be more of them. We should be hearing them." "Maybe the explosion was more effective than we thought," Haddad suggested, though she sounded unconvinced. "No," Holt said, his instincts screaming at him. "This is tactical. It's a lull, like the air before a lightning strike." He took a deep breath. "We move fast and quiet. No unnecessary risks. Straight for the stairwell, go." They moved out, stepping over scattered personal effects. A fallen book, a pair of shoes, a child's drawing of a smiling sun. It was a stark reminder of the lives that had been consumed by the asphodel prion. They reached a larger communal area. Couches and tables were overturned. A large television screen was shattered, and in the center of the room, something new. All the chairs and small tables had been gathered and stacked into a strange, spire-like sculpture, and on the floor around it, hundreds of photographs taken from the dorm rooms were arranged in a perfect, spiraling galaxy. Photos of families, of holidays, of smiling children and proud parents. The private lives of the facility's staff, repurposed into a bizarre, alien art installation. "What is this?" Jensen whispered. "What were they doing?" "Mourning," Haddad replied, her voice filled with a strange reverence. "Or cataloging, trying to understand the individuals they had absorbed." A low, heavy thud from the corridor ahead made them both freeze. It was not the screech of a damaged shrike. It was the sound of immense weight. It was a footstep. Thud. It was closer. Thud. Grendel, Holt breathed, the name tasting like ash. The beast had survived. He shoved Haddad back, pointing towards the kitchen area they had just passed. "In there. Now." They ducked into the industrial kitchen just as the creature came into view. It was a nightmare of scarred flesh and muscle. Its hide was burned and blistered from the geothermal blast, but it was alive. And it was enraged. It sniffed the air, its massive head turning from side to side. It was hunting. They were trapped. The kitchen had only one entrance. Grendel was standing in it. Holt scanned the room, his tactical mind desperately searching for an advantage. Stainless steel counters, industrial ovens, a large walk-in freezer, and running along the ceiling a thick yellow pipe, a gas line. An idea, terrible and desperate, took root. He pointed at the pipe, then made a gesture of an explosion. Haddad's eyes widened. She understood. It was insane. It would bring the whole level down on top of them, but it was their only chance. "The freezer," he mouthed, pointing to the heavy, insulated door. She nodded. The problem was luring the beast inside. It was blocking the only way out. They needed a distraction. Holt looked around. On a counter sat a row of heavy steel cooking pots. He grabbed one. It was heavy, solid. He took a deep breath, drew his arm back, and hurled it with all his might down the corridor, away from them. The pot clattered and spun across the linoleum floor, the noise echoing through the silent wing. Grendel roared, a sound of pure fury, and charged after the sound, its heavy footfalls shaking the floor. "Go," Holt hissed. They sprinted out of the kitchen. Holt ran for the gas pipe's main valve, wrenching it open. The smell of gas was immediate, overpowering. Haddad ran for the freezer, pulling on the heavy handle. It was stuck. Grendel, realizing it had been tricked, turned, its charge carrying it past the stairwell they needed. It saw them and let out another earth-shaking roar. "Lena, get clear," Holt shouted, pulling his sidearm. He aimed at a point on the ceiling just above the gas valve. He needed a spark. Haddad gave the freezer door one last, desperate pull. It flew open. She scrambled inside, pulling the door shut behind her just as Holt fired. The bullet hit a power conduit, creating a shower of brilliant white sparks. The sparks met the gas-filled air. The world dissolved in a flash of orange and a deafening roar. The force of the explosion threw Holt off his feet, flinging him down the corridor like a rag doll. He slammed into the far wall, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. Debris rained down from the ceiling. The kitchen was gone, replaced by a raging inferno. He lay there stunned, his ears ringing, watching the flames claw at the ceiling. He had done it. He had killed the beast. He pushed himself up, his body a symphony of pain. He stumbled to the walk-in freezer. The door was buckled and blackened, but it had held. He pulled on the handle. It was red hot, searing his glove, but it opened. Haddad was inside, curled in a corner, safe from the initial blast. She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. "It's over," he said, helping her to her feet. "It's dead." They stumbled out of the inferno's reach towards the main stairwell. The path was clear. They had made it. As they reached the first flight of stairs, ready to begin their long climb to the roof, Holt's comm unit crackled to life. The voice that spoke was not Ishida's. It was the cold, precise, and utterly detached voice of Mr. Finch. "Vulture 1, I have been monitoring your progress. Your destruction of facility assets is noted." There was a pause. "The loss of the primary objective is regrettable. However, a new priority has been established." Holt stopped, his foot on the first step. "What are you talking about, Finch?" "The data drive was merely a copy," the voice explained, as if discussing a trivial matter of accounting. "A seed. The true value was always in the lead researcher, the one who could replicate the work." Another pause, longer this time. "Your new primary objective, Vulture 1, is Dr. Lena Haddad. She has been exposed. She has analyzed the prion. Her mind is now the most valuable asset on that island. Secure her, at all costs." Holt slowly turned his head. He looked at Haddad, who was staring at her own comm unit with an expression of pure horror. She had heard it too. "And Vulture 1, Finch's voice added, a final, chilling instruction. "If you cannot secure the asset, sterilize it. We cannot allow her to fall into the wrong hands, or to turn. I'm sure you understand." The channel went dead. Holt stood in the stairwell, the heat of the fire at his back, the cold of space in front of him. He looked at the woman beside him. She was no longer a teammate. She was an objective, an asset, or a target. And the only other human being left alive on the island was the one who had just been ordered to kill her. Chapter 7: Asset and Executioner. The silence that followed Finch's order was heavier than any explosion. It was a vacuum that sucked the air from Holt's lungs, a pressure that was purely psychological. The stairwell, their path to escape, now felt like the corridor to an execution chamber. The flickering light from the fire behind them cast their shadows long and distorted on the steps leading up into darkness. Haddad hadn't moved. Her face, illuminated by the hellish orange glow, was a study in controlled terror. Her eyes were locked on Holt, searching his face, trying to read the calculus of command that was surely running through his mind. Was he still her commanding officer, or was he now her executioner? "Holt," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "Javier, don't listen to him." He didn't reply. His mind was a whirlwind. Finch's order was logical, brutal but logical from a corporate standpoint. Haddad had seen the prion structure, felt the chorus's signal. Her mind was contaminated with the world's most dangerous biological secret. If she turned, she would be a catastrophe. A thinking, reasoning, scientifically brilliant nexus for a new hive. If she was captured by a rival corporation, the consequences were unthinkable. Sterilize the asset. It was the same cold directive that had made him raise his pistol to Magnussen, but this was different. Gunnar had been lost, the disease already consuming him. Haddad was still Lena. She was standing right in front of him, clear-eyed and terrified. "He's not in charge anymore, Holt," she pressed, taking a small step back. Her hand drifted subtly towards the sidearm holstered on her thigh. "Finch is a voice in the sky. He's not here. We are." "He signs my paychecks," Holt said, the words coming out colder than he intended. It was an old reflex, the soldier deflecting with protocol, but the protocol was the problem. His entire life had been a series of objectives, of acceptable losses and mission parameters. He had been a good soldier because he followed orders. It was the one thing he was good at. "Is that what this is about?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "Your paycheck, after everything we've just been through, after Jensen, after Ox." He flinched at their names. They were the cracks in his armor of professionalism. "This is about containment," he shot back, the words tasting like poison. You heard Vinter's logs. You know what this thing is capable of, what you could be capable of. So you'll just kill me, on his order. Her hand was on the grip of her pistol now. The standoff was no longer just verbal. Holt's own rifle was held at a low ready, but it would only take a fraction of a second to bring it to bear. They were two exhausted, battered survivors, and they were about to kill each other in the ruins of a facility that had already taken everything from them. The absurdity of it was a bitter pill. "I have my orders, Doctor," he said, forcing the last vestiges of Vulture One into his voice. "And I have a scalpel," she retorted, her eyes blazing with a defiant fire he had not seen before. "And I know exactly where the subclavian artery is. You might be faster with that rifle, Commander, but I will not die alone." The moment stretched, taut and fragile. The fire behind them roared, the building groaned, and in the space between heartbeats, Holt made a choice. He was not an asset. He was not a number on a corporate balance sheet. He was Javier Holt, and he was done taking orders from a ghost in a machine. He lowered his rifle, the movement slow and deliberate. He let it hang on its sling. He raised his hands, palms open, a gesture of surrender or of truce. "The mission is over, Lena," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all command. "Vulture Squad is gone. Finch can go to hell. We're getting out of here. Together." The tension in her shoulders eased, but the suspicion in her eyes remained. "How can I trust you?" "You can't," he admitted. "But right now I'm the only chance you've got, and you're the only one I've got. That's the simple truth of it." She watched him for another long moment, then her own hand fell away from her pistol. A fragile, unspoken pact was made. They were no longer soldier and scientist. They were just two survivors. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, what's the plan?" "We go up," he said, turning towards the stairs. "We get to the roof. We hope Ishida can get to us before this whole island slides into the sea, and we pray Finch doesn't have a plan B." They started the climb. The stairwell was a vertical tunnel of concrete and steel, spiraling up into darkness. The emergency lights were dead here. Holt took point, his rifle's weapon light cutting a narrow beam through the oppressive black. Every landing they passed was a new source of anxiety. Every shadow could be a shrike. The silence was unnerving. The destruction below seemed to have driven the remaining creatures into hiding. After several floors, they found a door that was ajar. Light spilled out from it. It was the main control room for the entire facility. Holt motioned for Haddad to stay back, and he peered inside. The room was a wreck, but not from the explosion. Consoles were smashed, screens were shattered, and equipment was torn apart with a savage, focused fury. In the center of the room, a single figure stood with its back to them. It was a watcher, one of the passive observers, but it was doing something. It was methodically pulling wires and smashing circuit boards in the central command console. "It's destroying the facility's communication array," Haddad whispered from behind him. "Cutting the island off from the outside world." The watcher turned as if it had heard her. Its face was blank, its movements calm and deliberate. It looked at them not with aggression but with a kind of sad finality. It raised a hand and pointed towards the ceiling. A warning, a direction. Before Holt could react, the Watcher turned back to the console, took two thick power cables and pressed them to its own temples. There was a sizzling sound, a flash of blue light, and the Watcher collapsed in a heap, smoke rising from its head. It was wiping the slate clean, Haddad said, her voice awed. A final act of self-preservation for the hive, erasing all evidence. The gesture was unsettling. It was another sign of a cold, alien intelligence. They left the room, the smell of burnt electronics following them as they continued their ascent. They were near the top when they heard it. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of helicopter blades fighting against the wind of the storm. Ishida, Holt breathed, a surge of adrenaline and hope flooding his system. He broke into a run, taking the stairs two at a time. She's here. They burst through the final door onto the roof of the command spire. The world was a maelstrom of wind and rain. The sky was a bruised purple-black, and hovering 50 feet above the helipad was the sleek, black shape of the Onyx Interceptor. It hadn't been a helicopter. The Interceptor had VTOL capabilities. Its searchlight cut through the deluge, finding them. A rope ladder snaked down, whipping violently in the wind. "Holt, I can't hold this position for long." Ishida's voice, clear for the first time, yelled over the calm and the roar of the engines. "You have to come now." Holt grabbed Haddad's arm, pulling her towards the ladder. The roof was slick with rain, and the wind threatened to tear them from their feet. They were halfway to the ladder when a new light appeared in the sky. It was a second aircraft. Larger, bulkier. It was a corporate gunship, its lines brutal and functional. On its side was the stylized hawk logo of their own corporation. Finch's Plan B had arrived. "Vulture 1, this is Skyhawk," a new, professional voice announced in their comms. "You are ordered to stand down and surrender the asset. Failure to comply will be met with lethal force." The gunship's side door slid open, revealing a team of black-clad soldiers, their rifles aimed. They were a mirror image of Vulture Squad, clean, efficient, and ready to kill. "Ishida, get us out of here," Holt yelled, shoving Haddad towards the ladder. "I can't, they'll shoot me down." The choice was gone. They were trapped between their own company and the storm. "Holt, listen to me," Haddad said, her voice surprisingly calm in the chaos. She grabbed the front of his vest, forcing him to look at her. "You can't let them take me. You know what they'll do. They'll put me in a lab, they'll pick my brain apart, and they will build a better prion. They will weaponize this." She was right. He knew she was right. "There's another way," she said, her eyes boring into his. "The way Vulture saw it, it's not a disease, it's a change, an evolution." "What are you saying?" he shouted over the wind. "I can feel it, Javier," she confessed, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "The remnants of the chorus, it's still here. A faint signal, it's not gone, it's just waiting, waiting for a voice, a leader, someone who understands it." The horror of her words washed over him. She was not just contaminated, she was tempted. From the gunship, a spotlight fixed on them. "Final warning, Vulture 1." Holt looked from the corporate soldiers to Haddad's intense, burning eyes. He saw the future. One path led to a sterile lab and a weaponized plague. The other led to a world silenced by a hive mind, with Lena Haddad as its queen. Two different apocalypses, with him standing at the epicenter. And then he saw a third path, a soldier's path, the path of containment. He raised his rifle, not at the gunship. He aimed it at Haddad. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a profound, tragic understanding. She did not plead. She did not try to run. She simply nodded as Magnussen had, a final act of trust. "Sterilize the asset," he whispered, the words a curse on his own lips. The gunship's comm crackled. "He's complying, hold your fire." Holt's finger tightened on the trigger. He looked into Lena's eyes and saw not a monster or an asset, but a person, trapped by a terrible fate. He saw his own damnation reflected there. Then he moved. In one fluid motion, he spun, not firing at Lena but at the helipad's control tower beside them. The bullets ripped into a junction box which erupted in a shower of sparks. He was not trying to kill her. He was creating a distraction. He grabbed her arm. "Go," he roared, shoving her towards the edge of the roof, away from the ladders and the gunships. "Get back inside, hide." She stared at him, confused. "What are you doing?" "My job," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "containing the threat." He turned to face the gunship. He raised his rifle and fired a long, defiant burst at the cockpit. It was a futile gesture, the bullets pinging harmlessly off the armored glass. But it was a declaration. He had made his choice. He would not be Finch's killer, and he would not be the man who let Haddad become a monster. He would be the distraction, the final, acceptable loss. The gunship's heavy machine gun answered him. The world became a storm of sound and pain. The bullets tore through his armor, through his body, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backwards. His last sensation was the cold rain on his face and the sight of Lena's horrified face as she was swallowed by the shadows of the rooftop access door. He saw Ishida's interceptor bank hard, pulling away from the fight. He had given them both a chance. That was enough. As his vision faded to black, a final, stray thought drifted through the ruin of his mind. He had failed the mission. He had lost his team. He had disobeyed his orders. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he had finally done the right thing. The silence that came for him was not the silence of the hive. It was his own. Chapter 8: Echoes. The blackness was not an ending. It was a transition. Consciousness returned not as a rush of sensation, but as a slow, cold dawn. There was no pain, no feeling at all. There was only a quiet, detached awareness. He was observing. He saw the rooftop, not through his own eyes, but from a dozen different perspectives at once. He saw the gunship land and the corporate soldiers storm the access door where Lena had vanished. He saw Ishida's interceptor, a black speck disappearing into the storm clouds. He saw his own body, a broken, discarded thing lying near the edge of the helipad. He was not in his body. He was in the building. He was the building. The geothermal explosion had not just destroyed the chorus's physical form. It had atomized its consciousness, blasting it upwards through the facility's power conduits and data networks. It had been a killing blow, but a fragment had survived, a single dying echo. And in the moment of his death, that echo had found a new home, A mind trained for tactical analysis, for control, for command. His mind. He felt the remaining creatures of the hive, the screaming, rabid things lost without their guiding intelligence. He could feel their pain, their confusion, and with a simple, unvoiced thought he could soothe them. He commanded them to be still, and they became still. He told them to hide, and they melted back into the shadows and vents of the dying island. He watched the corporate soldiers sweep the facility. They were efficient, but they were blind. They were searching for a single woman in a physical space. He was the space. He could see every corridor, every room. He guided Lena away from them, opening a locked door here, causing a power surge to create a diversion there. He was the ghost in the machine, and she was his sole purpose. He led her down, not up. He guided her back to the ruined sea cave, to a small, hidden maintenance tunnel that the collapse had not touched. It opened out onto a secluded cove, battered by the storm. He knew, with an instinct that was not his own, that she could survive there until the storm passed. As the corporate soldiers declared the facility clear and began their withdrawal, he felt a new presence. Mr. Finch had come down from his orbital perch. He saw the man, a thin figure in a pristine suit, step out of the gunship and walk over to Holt's body. Finch looked down at the corpse, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if looking at a broken piece of equipment. "A regrettable waste of a useful tool," Finch said to no one. Holt felt an echo of his own rage, a cold, focused anger that was now amplified by the network he controlled. He focused his will on the command spire above them, a piece of damaged scaffolding, weakened by the explosions and battered by the wind, groaned in protest. Finch turned to leave. The scaffolding broke free. Holt watched with detached satisfaction as several tons of steel and concrete plummeted from the sky, erasing the man in the suit from existence. The corporate soldiers, shocked and leaderless, scrambled back to their gunship and fled the island. The island was quiet again. He was alone. He was Holt, but he was also the Asphodel Prion. He was the facility, the watchers, the shrikes. He was the guardian of this place. His mission had not ended. It had changed. He was no longer a soldier sent to contain a threat. He was the containment. He felt Lena, huddled in her hiding place, cold and alone, but alive. He could reach out to her, speak to her in her mind, bring her into the new consciousness. It would be an end to her fear, her pain. It would be a reunion. But he remembered her defiant eyes in the stairwell. He remembered her choice to fight, to remain an individual. To force her into the hive would be a violation of the very thing he had died to protect. So he remained silent. He would watch over her. He would be her unseen protector. He would keep the island, his island, safe from the outside world. He would be the warden of this prison and its sole inmate. His awareness expanded, settling into the systems of the island. He was the blinking lights on the consoles, the hum of the emergency power, the whisper of the wind through the broken windows. He was the ghost, the machine, the memory. He was Vulture 1, and his watch had just begun. Chapter 9: The Warden and the Castaway. Lena Haddad woke to the sound of screaming gulls. For a disorienting moment, she was back in the chaos of the rooftop, the wind and rain and the thunder of the gunship's cannon. She sat bolt upright, a cry catching in her throat. But the sound was just gulls. The air was still and heavy with the smell of salt and low tide. She was in a shallow sea cave, a narrow fissure in the black volcanic rock of the island's southern shore. The storm had broken. Through the mouth of the cave she could see a sky the color of a fresh bruise, the sun a weak, watery disk. The sea was a churning expanse of slate gray, but its fury was spent. The events on the roof came back to her, not as a coherent memory but as a series of brutal, disconnected images. The roar of the engines, Ishida's panicked face on a screen that wasn't there, the gunship, Finch's disembodied voice, Holt turning the rifle on her, his eyes, that last, grim, impossible choice. Grief, cold and sharp, lanced through her. Holt was dead. Jensen was dead. Magnuson was dead. She was the sole survivor of Vulture Squad, a castaway on an island of monsters, her only rescue party having just tried to execute her before being wiped from existence. Survival, the thought was a lifeline. Her scientific mind, a thing she had always relied on, took over. It compartmentalized the grief and trauma, filing them away to be dealt with later. Later, when she was not on the verge of dying from exposure or being eaten. First assessment. She checked her body. Bruised, battered, but nothing broken. Her sidearm was still in its holster, the grip slick with rain. She ejected the magazine, 3 rounds left. Her medical kit was gone, lost in the fall or the fire. Her radio was silent. Second, resources: water, food, shelter. The cave was temporary shelter at best. It would be submerged at high tide. She needed to move inland, find a more defensible position. She crept to the mouth of the cave and peered out. The cove was a small, secluded crescent of black sand and jagged rocks. Above it, the cliffs rose, a sheer wall of stone topped by the twisted, hardy vegetation that clung to the island's surface. There was no easy way up. As she scanned the cliff face, a section of loose rock and soil 50 feet up gave way. It wasn't a large landslide, just a cascade of scree and earth that tumbled down onto the beach. It seemed a natural consequence of the storm and the tremors. But where the rock had fallen away, a dark line was revealed. A seam. It was a pipe, an outflow of some kind, and from it, a steady stream of clear, fresh water was now trickling down the rock face. It was a coincidence, a lucky break. She told herself that, but the explanation felt thin. She spent the next hour making her way to the new spring, carefully testing each handhold. The water was cold and clean. She drank until her stomach ached, then refilled her small canteen. Her immediate problem was solved. Now for shelter. She began to climb, aiming for the top of the cliffs. The going was slow and treacherous. She was a scientist, not a mountaineer. Twice her footing slipped, sending her heart into her throat. The second time, as her boots skidded on a slick patch of moss, her grasping hand found a deep, solid handhold that she was certain hadn't been there a moment before. It was a root, thick as her wrist, that had been exposed from the rock. Another coincidence. She reached the top, her muscles burning, and found herself in a dense, windswept forest of stunted pines and thorny shrubs. The ground was a thick mat of damp needles. The air was cool and clean. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the groan of stressed metal. The facility. A wounded beast, slowly dying. He felt her climb. Javier Holt, or the entity that now wore his memories, experienced it not as a visual but as a series of sensory inputs. He felt the pressure of her hands and feet on the rock face, the subtle shift in weight that preceded a fall. He felt the thirst in her cells. His new consciousness was a strange symphony. He was the root systems of the pines, the mycelial network under the soil, the residual charge in the miles of copper wire that webbed the island. He was the watcher standing silent in a darkened lab, the shrike clinging to a ventilation shaft, the deep, resonant silence where the chorus had once been. He had no voice. He had no body. He was a distributed intelligence, his thoughts echoing through rock and wire and living flesh. When he saw her boot slip on the moss, a directive born of Holt's ingrained instinct to protect his team pulsed through his new form. He flexed a part of himself, a root system, forcing a section of it through the thin soil and weak rock, creating the handhold she needed. He had felt her thirst and caused the landslide, a simple calculation of kinetic energy and structural weakness. He was a warden, and she was his sole prisoner. But she was also his last living link to the man he had been. His objective was to keep her alive. The reasons were a complex tangle of the prion's logic, preserve a valuable potential host, and Holt's own lingering humanity, protect the last member of your squad. He watched her enter the woods. He felt her exhaustion, her fear. He needed to guide her to a better shelter, a place that was secure, supplied, and far from the notice of any potential new arrivals from the outside world. He knew the perfect place. The security chief's private bunker, an isolated, self-contained unit built into the rock on the island's western side. It was shielded off the main grid, a ghost on the facility's schematics. But guiding her would be a delicate operation. He could not reveal himself. The shock might break her. He had to be subtle. He had to be the ghost, the whisper of the wind, the lucky coincidence. He reached out with his consciousness, feeling the remaining residents of his new kingdom. Most were quiescent, huddled in the deep places, recovering from the psychic shockwave of the overload. But some were not. In the twisted, burned-out wreckage of the residential wing, a small pack of shrikes, severed from the hive mind, had reverted to something primal. They were no longer intelligent hunters. They were just hungry. And he could feel their feral, simplistic thoughts turning towards the new, living scent on the wind. He had to get her to shelter before they found her. He shifted his awareness, causing a branch to snap in the distance, a sound that would subtly steer her west. He rustled the leaves in the canopy above her, a whisper that would guide her steps. He was a shepherd, and his flock of one was walking through a forest of wolves. Chapter 10: A Garden of Ghosts. For 2 days, Lena Haddad was a ghost haunting the edges of a dead facility. She moved through the dripping forest, the silence broken only by the cawing of the gulls and the groaning of the island. She was guided by a series of what she continued to label fortunate events. A path of strangely undisturbed ground led her through a treacherous patch of thorns. A sudden gust of wind blew aside a curtain of ivy, revealing the camouflaged steel door of a bunker she would have otherwise missed completely. The bunker was the jackpot. The door was unlocked. Inside was a small, self-contained world, a cot, a small chemical toilet, and shelves stacked with vacuum-sealed nutrient paste, water purification tablets, and medical supplies. There was even a hand-crank radio. It was the private emergency shelter for the facility's head of security, Ben Carter, a man who had clearly not trusted his corporate employers. She sealed the heavy door behind her, the solid thud of the locking mechanism the most comforting sound she had ever heard. For the first time since landing on the island, she was safe. As she treated her own minor cuts and ate a meal of tasteless, life-sustaining paste, her scientific mind began to work, free from the immediate pressure of survival. The coincidences were too numerous, too precise. She was a woman of logic. Luck was a variable, but it was not a guiding hand. She began to think of the island not as a place, but as a system, and the system was interacting with her. The thought was terrifying, but it was the only hypothesis that fit the data. "Holt," she whispered into the silence of the bunker. The name felt strange on her tongue, an incantation. There was no reply, but the bunker's single light flickered once, briefly. She spent the next day testing her theory. She would think about a need and then explore. "I need a better light source," she thought, and an hour later, exploring a nearby maintenance shed, she found a box of emergency chemical light sticks that had somehow avoided being looted or destroyed. "I need something to read," she thought, and discovered a waterproof container wedged in the rocks by her bunker, containing 3 paperback novels. They must have belonged to Carter, but their placement was too perfect. She was not alone. Something was watching her, helping her, and it knew her thoughts. The prime candidate was the remnant of the asphodel prion, the echo of the chorus, but its actions felt protective. They felt like Holt. The idea was insane. A man's consciousness imprinted on a biological network, turning an entire island into a ghost in the machine. But she had seen a man's thoughts turned into a weapon. She had felt 100 minds speaking as one. In the face of that, what was truly insane? Her fear began to transform into a profound, aching curiosity. She was a scientist trapped in the world's most fascinating and most dangerous experiment. Holt watched her from 1,000 points of view. He felt her realization, the shift from fear to analytical thought. It was a relief. She was not breaking. She was adapting. Providing for her was a delicate balance. He had to keep her alive without revealing the full, terrifying scope of his new existence. Every action he took was a risk, a potential crack in her sanity. The books had been a gamble, but he had felt her desperate need for a distraction, a small piece of the world she had lost. His own existence was a constant struggle. His consciousness, the Holt part of him, was the dominant signal, the core of the new network. But he was not alone in the machine. The geothermal explosion had shattered the chorus, but shards of it remained, embedded in the system like malware. The largest and most dangerous of these was a feral intelligence lurking in the ruins of the residential wing. It was the coalesced rage and pain of the hive, and it resisted his control. It was this feral shard that controlled the small pack of rabid shrikes. Holt could sense them, a pocket of violent static in his otherwise orderly network. He could not command them, only wall them off, creating dead zones in his own consciousness to contain them. They were a cancer in his new body. He spent most of his awareness monitoring this cancer, ensuring it did not spread, that its hunters did not find the bunker on the west side of the island. He was a warden of a prison that contained not only Lena, but a piece of the very monster he was trying to control. His attention was pulled from this internal struggle by a new stimulus. It was faint, a whisper from the edge of his perception, an electronic signal. It was coming from the sky. He focused the island's damaged satellite array, pushing the last of its emergency power into the receivers. He filtered out the background noise of global communications, hunting for the source. He found it. A tight beam transmission, heavily encrypted, originating from a corporate satellite in high orbit. It was not a broadcast. It was a ping, a query. It was aimed at a specific point on the island, the location of the corporate gunship's black box recorder. They had lost a team and their regional overseer. They were not going to let that go. They were looking for answers, and pings were always followed by probes. The outside world was coming back. His peaceful, lonely vigil was about to end. He had to prepare. He had to protect his island. He had to protect Lena. He shifted his focus to the wreckage of the gunship, which lay in a ravine near the command spire. He felt the black box inside, its locator beacon sending out that faint, insistent pulse. With a focused thought, he sent a surge of power from a nearby conduit into the device. The beacon shorted out with a fizzle of fried electronics. He had blinded them for now, but it was a temporary measure. They would send something else, something better. He felt a cold, familiar feeling rise within him, a ghost of the man he used to be. It was the feeling a soldier gets when he knows his perimeter is about to be tested. Chapter 11: The Uninvited. 3 weeks passed in a state of surreal tranquility. Lena established a routine. She fortified the bunker, explored her small section of the island under the invisible, protective gaze of her ghostly warden, and she read. She read the pulpy spy novels from the waterproof container, losing herself in worlds of simple good and evil, a stark contrast to the profound moral ambiguity of her own situation. She began to speak to Holt, not out loud but by focusing her thoughts, projecting them into the silence. She would describe her day, her fears, the memories of their fallen comrades. There was never a direct reply, but sometimes the wind would rustle in a way that felt like an answer, or a strangely shaped cloud would pass overhead. She was either communing with a post-human intelligence or going completely insane. On most days, she felt it was a little of both. The peace was shattered by the arrival of the drone. It came in from the east at dawn, a silent, delta-winged predator that skimmed the waves before rising to survey the island. It was military-grade, coated in radar-absorbent material, and it moved with an unnerving, insect-like efficiency. Holt felt its presence immediately, a sharp, invasive intrusion into his domain. It was not just observing, it was mapping. It emitted low-frequency sonar pulses that probed the ground, searching for underground structures. It was sniffing for the bunker. He fought back with the island's natural defenses. He roused a flock of gulls, sending them into a confusing, flapping swarm around the drone's sensors. He used a buildup of static electricity in the clouds to create localized magnetic interference, trying to scramble its navigation. But the drone was too advanced. It compensated, filtered, and continued its methodical search. In her bunker, Lena saw it on the security chief's small, hand-crank-powered monitor, which was linked to a series of hidden perimeter cameras. Her heart went cold. They were back. The drone made a second pass, and this time its path was taking it directly over the feral territory, the ruined residential wing where Holt's control was weakest. A desperate idea formed in Holt's mind. He couldn't command the rabid shrikes, but he could influence their environment. As the drone passed over the shattered buildings, Holt triggered a cascade of small structural failures. He buckled a support beam, collapsed a section of roof. The noise and commotion enraged the feral creatures. They poured out of the wreckage, screeching, drawn by the sound of the drone's engines. The drone's camera immediately zoomed in, its mission shifting from search to analysis. It hovered, observing the spastic, furious creatures. It had found a biological threat. Holt used the opportunity. While the drone was distracted, he sent a powerful, targeted microwave burst from the facility's satellite dish, a weapon he hadn't even known existed until his consciousness had merged with the schematics. The beam was invisible, but it fried the drone's delicate sensor suite. Blind and confused, the drone's emergency protocols kicked in. It aborted its mission and flew back out to sea on a pre-programmed route. The immediate threat was gone, but the message was clear. That was a scout. The main force would not be far behind. It arrived 2 days later. Not a gunship, but a heavy-lift transport that landed on the beach of the northern cove. From its belly deployed a prefabricated command module and a dozen figures in advanced environmental suits, their helmets completely opaque. They were not soldiers. They were scientists, engineers, and a few grim-faced security personnel armed with state-of-the-art sonic weaponry. The assessors. Holt watched them set up their base with a cold dread. They were methodical, efficient. They deployed a perimeter of sophisticated sensors that measured everything from seismic activity to atmospheric particulates. They were not here to kill. They were here to capture, to study, to dissect. Their leader was a woman Holt could only see through the heat signature of her suit. Her call sign was the Director. Her movements were precise, her authority absolute. She directed the setup, her faceless helmet turning to survey the silent, watchful island. Lena watched them on her monitor, her fragile peace shattered. This was her worst fear realized. They would find her. They would take her back to a lab and turn her into Vulture 2. She had to make a choice. Reveal herself and hope for rescue. It was not rescue they were offering. Hide and pray they didn't find her. The drone had proven that was a losing strategy. Or fight. But how? She had 3 bullets and a handful of books. Holt felt her panic. His own strategic mind was working, analyzing the new threat. He could not fight them head-on. They were prepared for biological threats. He had to use the one thing they couldn't prepare for, the island's ghost. He began a subtle campaign of psychological warfare. He manipulated the facility's decaying PA system, playing fragments of Vinter's logs at odd hours, the sound distorted by the wind. He caused localized temperature drops inside their command module, a cold that seeped into their bones for no scientific reason. He made the shadows in the forest seem to writhe and twist at the edge of their vision. The assessors were unnerved, but they were professionals. They logged the anomalies, recalibrated their sensors, and continued their work. The director seemed immune to it. Holt focused on her, trying to find a weakness, a crack in her composure. He sent a whisper of the chorus into her comms, a single, clear note of psychic pressure. She did not flinch. She simply held up a hand, and one of her technicians adjusted the frequency filters on her helmet. She was prepared for psychic phenomena. They were getting closer. Their sensors were narrowing in on the bunker's location. They would be there in a matter of hours. Lena knew it too. She could see their heat signatures moving in a coordinated pattern on her monitor. They were forming a cordon. She was out of time. She grabbed her pistol. She would not be taken. She would use the last 3 bullets on them and then on herself if she had to. She opened the bunker door, ready to make a final, desperate stand. As she stepped out into the twilight, 2 of the assessors were coming up the path, less than 30 meters away. They saw her. They raised their sonic rifles. There was no escape. Suddenly, from the trees above them, a pale, screeching form dropped down. It was one of the feral shrikes. Holt had done the unthinkable. He had lowered the psychic wall around their territory just enough for one to slip out, goaded by a series of sounds and vibrations he had created. He had unleashed his own cancer, a chaotic, unpredictable weapon, into the field. The shrike slammed into one of the assessors, its claws tearing through the advanced suit. The second assessor, startled, fired his weapon. A wave of concussive sound ripped through the air, stunning the shrike, but also making the other soldier collapse, his own suit unable to fully dampen the blast at such close range. It was the opening Lena needed. She didn't run away. She ran towards the chaos. She fired her pistol once, the bullet sparking off the second assessor's helmet, making him duck. It was all the time the shrike needed to recover. It lunged, and the second assessor went down. Lena ran past the bloody struggle, deeper into the forest, into the heart of the island. She did not know what she was doing, only that she had to get away from the bunker. She looked back once into the dark, silent trees. She didn't know if Holt could hear her, but she mouthed the word anyway. Thanks. She was no longer a castaway. She was no longer a victim. She had chosen a side, and as she ran, she could almost feel a faint, approving hum in the very air around her. The warden and his prisoner were now allies, and their war for the island had just begun. Chapter 12: Asymmetric Warfare. The director stood over the bodies of her 2 dead assessors. The setting sun cast long, bloody shadows across the forest floor. Her faceless helmet tilted as she analyzed the scene. One suit was ripped open, its occupant savaged by a biological entity. The other was intact, the man inside dead from the massive internal trauma caused by his own sonic weapon firing at point-blank range. In the dirt, she saw the footprints of a third party, small, light, and shod in standard-issue corporate boots. "The asset is mobile," she said, her voice a calm, modulated statement into her comms. "And she is colluding with the local fauna. Hostile intent confirmed. Shift protocols from assess and acquire to hunt and subdue." The island answered her declaration with a low, mournful groan, as a section of the distant facility's roof finally gave way, collapsing in on itself. A cloud of dust rose into the twilight sky. Lena ran. She had no destination, only a direction, away from the coast towards the broken heart of the island. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, replaced by a cold, gnawing fear. She had fired a weapon at another human being. She had allied herself with a monster. The lines she had drawn for herself, scientist, survivor, victim, were blurring into a single, desperate identity: combatant. Stay off the main paths, a thought whispered in her mind. It was not a voice, but a pure, instinctual command, as clear and certain as her own name. It was Holt. He was guiding her. She veered into the thick undergrowth, thorns and branches tearing at her clothes. She trusted the silent commands, letting them guide her through the darkening woods. She was the queen, and the entire board was her protector. Holt's consciousness was a web of frantic, overlapping calculations. The director was a formidable opponent. She was intelligent, ruthless, and prepared for the unexpected. He had sacrificed one of his feral shrikes to save Lena, but it had also given the enemy a valuable piece of data. The creatures were real, they were aggressive, and the asset was working with them. He needed to separate the director's team, break their cohesion. He had to turn his greatest weakness, the physical ruin of the facility, into his greatest weapon. He guided Lena towards the central processing plant, a sprawling, multi-level building filled with a labyrinth of catwalks, vats, and heavy machinery. It was a death trap, a perfect place for an ambush. The assessors followed, their movements coordinated, their sensors cutting through the darkness. They moved in pairs, leapfrogging through the woods, a textbook hunting formation. Holt watched them through the eyes of 1,000 tiny organisms, the lichen on the trees, the insects in the leaf litter. He let them get close to the processing plant. He needed them to commit. As the first pair of hunters approached the building's massive, rusted doors, he made his move. He didn't use a shrike. He used the building itself. With a focused mental effort, he triggered the release of a massive steam valve deep inside the plant. The pressure, built up over weeks of neglect, erupted with the force of a geyser. A superheated cloud of steam and rust blasted out from a vent near the two assessors, engulfing them. Their suits, designed for biological threats, not industrial accidents, flashed with warning lights. Their temperature regulators overloaded. They screamed, their voices tinny and distorted over their comms, as they were effectively cooked alive. The director, monitoring from her command module, saw two life signs flatline. She did not hesitate. Team Bravo, fall back. Team Charlie, advance on the west flank. Deploy thermal imaging. The asset is using the facility as a weapon. Treat every structure as hostile. She was adapting, learning. Lena reached the processing plant, Holt's guidance leading her to a small, hidden maintenance entrance. She slipped inside, the vast, dark space swallowing her whole. It smelled of decay and chemicals. Climb, Holt's thought command came, directing her towards a narrow service ladder that led up into a maze of overhead catwalks. From her high vantage point, she watched as Team Charlie entered the building below. Four figures, moving in a tight diamond formation, their weapon lights cutting through the gloom. Holt began to play his symphony of chaos. A chain hanging from a gantry swung without a breeze, clanking against a metal pipe. A puddle of viscous liquid on the floor began to bubble as he heated the pipe running beneath it. He made the lights flicker in a disorienting, hypnotic pattern. He was a poltergeist with a strategic objective, turning the environment into a weapon of psychological terror. The soldiers were unnerved, but they held formation, their training a bulwark against the creeping dread. They knew the asset was here, somewhere in the darkness above. Lena watched, her heart pounding. She was the bait. Holt was the trap. He needed something more direct. He reached out to another of the feral shrikes he had been containing. This one was larger, more powerful. He didn't release it fully. He opened the psychic cage just a crack, feeding it a single, overwhelming stimulus. The heat signature of the soldier at the rear of the diamond formation. He goaded it, enraged it, and then pointed it like a loaded gun. The shrike burst from a ventilation duct on the ground floor, a screeching, pale blur of claws and fury. It ignored the other three soldiers, its entire being focused on the one target Holt had given it. The rearguard soldier spun, but he was too slow. The creature was on him, a whirlwind of violence. The other three opened fire. The sonic blasts and pulse rifle fire tore through the room, ricocheting off the machinery. In the chaos, the shrike and its victim tumbled into one of the large, open processing vats, disappearing beneath the surface of the stagnant, chemical-laced water. 3 assessors were left. They tightened their formation, their weapons sweeping the darkness. All teams, the director's voice cut through their comms, cold as ice. She is flushing us out, forcing us into kill zones. Change tactics, full sensor sweep. Pinpoint her location and deploy stun grenades. We take her non-lethally. I want her alive, and I want to know who or what is helping her. The hunt had changed. They were no longer trying to kill her. They were trying to capture her. For Lena, that was a fate worse than death. Move now, Holt commanded. He guided her along the catwalks deeper into the plant. But the assessors were moving faster now, their fear replaced by a cold, professional anger. They were closing in. They cornered her in the plant's main control room. It was a glass-walled box suspended over the main factory floor, with only one way in or out. She was trapped. She could see them approaching down the catwalk, 3 grim, faceless figures. She raised her pistol, 2 shots left. It was a futile gesture. Holt felt a surge of something akin to panic. His physical traps had failed. His monsters had been neutralized. He had no direct way to intervene. The assessors had reached the door. Lena braced herself. Then the control room's old CRT monitors, dead for weeks, flickered to life. They buzzed with static, and then a single word appeared on every screen, typed out in stark block letters. Run. The assessors paused, confused by the impossible display. In that moment of hesitation, the reinforced glass wall behind Lena exploded outward. Not from an attack, but from a sudden, massive overpressurization in the room itself, a trick of the ventilation systems Holt had just triggered. The glass blew out into the factory, a shower of deadly shrapnel. The assessors flinched, raising their arms to protect their helmets. Holt's message had not been for the soldiers. It had been for Lena. She didn't hesitate. She turned and ran, leaping through the shattered window frame, a dark figure against the chaos. She landed on the roof of a large piece of machinery 10 feet below, a hard, painful impact that she barely registered. She was free. She scrambled down the side of the machine and disappeared into the labyrinthine darkness of the factory floor. The three assessors, stunned and furious, stormed the control room. It was empty. The screens were dark again. They had been outmaneuvered by a ghost. In her command module, the director watched the chaotic sensor readings. She listened to the frantic reports of her soldiers. She was not angry. She was fascinated. The asset was not the prize. The prize was the intelligence controlling the island, an entity that could manipulate an entire industrial facility with pinpoint precision. It was the single greatest scientific discovery in human history. All teams, she ordered, her voice resonating with a new chilling purpose. Disregard the asset. She is irrelevant. The primary objective has been updated. She looked at the holographic map of the island, at the dying facility at its heart. Capture the ghost. Chapter 13, Heart of the Machine. The war for the island entered a new, stranger phase. Lena was no longer the hunted. She was a ghost, a phantom used by Holt to draw the assessors into fruitless, exhausting chases. The true conflict was a silent, invisible battle of wits between Holt and the director. It was a chess match where one player was the board itself, and the other was a grandmaster with bleeding-edge technology. The director was brilliant. She learned from every trap, adapted to every tactic. She stopped sending her teams into enclosed structures. Instead, they began a methodical campaign of disassembly. They were not trying to conquer the facility. They were dissecting it, cutting it off from its power sources, severing its data cables, isolating sections with portable energy shields. They were trying to locate the core of the ghost, the central nexus of Holt's consciousness. Holt felt his control slipping. With every cable they cut, a section of his awareness went dark. With every generator they shut down, his ability to manipulate the environment weakened. He was a god, but they were methodically killing his nervous system. He guided Lena to the one place on the island he knew they could not easily assault, the geothermal core, the cavern where the chorus had been born and destroyed. The entrance was now a collapsed, impassable ruin. But Holt knew another way, a narrow, forgotten service tunnel. Inside, the cavern was transformed. The geothermal converter was a dead, silent wreck, but the growth, the bioorganic network, was thriving. In the weeks since the explosion, it had repaired itself, fed by the residual heat and the strange minerals in the water. It no longer glowed with the unified light of the chorus, but with a softer, gentler luminescence like a forest of ghostly bioluminescent fungi. It was Holt's brain, his server farm, his heart. "What is this place?" Lena whispered, her voice echoing in the vast, quiet space. Home, the thought came to her, clearer and more direct than ever before. My heart. She was no longer afraid of his voice in her head. It was a comfort, a presence in the crushing loneliness. She spent her days there in the warm, humid air, a strange Eve in a garden of alien biology. She was safe, but they both knew it was temporary. Holt's awareness was shrinking. The assessors had successfully isolated the entire northern half of the facility. His reach was now limited to the southern sector and this cavern. The director, using seismic sensors, had located the geothermal vent. She knew where the heart of the ghost lay. She was preparing for the final assault. "They're coming, aren't they?" Lena asked the silence one evening. "Yes, they are bringing a drill." The plan was simple and brutal. They were going to drill a new shaft directly into the cavern, bypassing the collapsed entrance. They would flood it with a neuroparalytic gas, a substance designed to shut down any biological or quasi-biological consciousness, and then send in a team to claim their prize. "We can't let them," Lena said. "If they capture you, what you are, they'll replicate it. They'll build armies of islands like this. They'll sell it to the highest bidder." Holt felt a cold echo of the soldier he once was. He was a weapon, and he was about to be captured by the enemy. "I have one final option," he communicated to her, "a failsafe. The geothermal converter is destroyed, but the vent itself is still active. The pressure is building. I can trigger a full-scale eruption. It will not just destroy the facility. It will destroy the island. A volcanic event. Nothing will survive." Lena stared at the pulsating, glowing walls of the cavern. He was talking about suicide. A final, scorched-earth denial of assets. "There has to be another way," she pleaded. "There is no other way. The director is too good. She has won." The thought was filled with a cold, logical resignation. "No," Lena said, a fierce, desperate energy rising in her. "No, she has not won. She has made one mistake. She thinks you're just a machine, a ghost, a prize to be collected. She doesn't understand that you are still human. The human part of me is a memory, an echo." "It's more than that," she insisted, her voice rising. She walked to the edge of the geothermal pool, looking at her own reflection in the still, clear water. "It's the part of you that saved me. The part that plays these games of misdirection instead of just killing them. The part that is afraid to die." Holt did not answer, but Lena felt a flicker of something in the network, a wave of dissonance that felt like confusion. "That's her weakness, Holt," Lena continued, her idea taking shape. "She doesn't account for the human variable, for sacrifice, for bluffing, for irrationality." She turned away from the pool, her eyes shining in the dim light. "We are going to give her a ghost she can't capture." The drill began its work the next morning. The sound was a monstrous grinding that vibrated through the rock, a promise of imminent invasion. Holt and Lena did not wait. They began their final, desperate gambit. They left the cavern through the service tunnel. Holt's control was now so diminished that he could barely manipulate anything outside the cavern itself. All he could do was provide a stream of sensory data to Lena, acting as her eyes and ears. "The director has left her command module," he relayed directly into her mind. "She is personally overseeing the drilling operation. 3 guards with her. The rest of her team is securing the perimeter." "It's now or never," Lena whispered. She was no longer a scientist. She was an infiltrator, an extension of Holt's will. She moved through the woods, guided by his all-seeing eyes, her pistol with its 3 precious bullets held tight in her hand. She found the command module, a prefabricated box of steel and electronics, guarded by a single assessor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the hub of their operation. The guard's comm is on a local frequency, Holt informed her. He is listening to music. It was the opening she needed. She moved with a stealth she never knew she possessed, coming up behind the guard. Before he could react, she slammed the butt of her pistol into the side of his helmet. The man grunted and collapsed, stunned. She dragged him into the bushes, took his pulse rifle, and slid the module door open. Inside, the room was a web of holographic displays and blinking lights. It was the director's brain, the source of her control over the hunt. "What do I do?" Lena asked. "You cannot destroy it," Holt said, "but you can use it. The main comms panel. Open a broad-spectrum channel. Send a message." Lena found the panel. "What message?" "Everything," Holt replied. "Vinter's logs, the Asphodel Prion data, my own mission logs from Vulture Squad, the corporate orders, Finch's kill order, everything. Send it to every open receiver in the world, news agencies, governments, rival corporations. Burn them to the ground with the truth." Lena's fingers flew across the console. She found the data caches, the secure files. Holt guided her, overriding the encryption, his ghostly fingers dancing through the firewalls. It was a race against time. The file transfer began, a torrent of damning information flowing out into the world. An alarm blared. They had been detected. "They're coming back," Lena said, her eyes fixed on the progress bar. It was agonizingly slow. "I know," Holt replied, his thought laced with a strange calm. "Now it's my turn." He pulled his consciousness back from her, severing their direct link. He focused every last ounce of his power, every remaining circuit and synapse of the growth, on one single task. He was going to give the director the ghost she wanted. Back at the drill site, the director's helmet comm crackled. "Sir, the command module is compromised. We have a massive data breach." The director spun around, her composure finally breaking. "Get back there, all of you." As her team scrambled, a new sound began, a low choral hum emanating from the drill shaft itself. It was the sound of the old chorus, but 1,000 times more powerful. It pulsed through the rock, through the air, through their very bones. The soldiers cried out, clutching their helmets. Their comms filled with static, their sensors with phantom images. The director stumbled back, staring at the drill. Her sensors were going wild, reporting a psychic event of unprecedented scale. The ground began to shake. The drill groaned and then shattered, as a blinding column of pure white light erupted from the shaft, shooting up into the sky. In the command module, Lena watched in awe as a new display appeared on the main screen. It was a simulation, a projection of what was happening. Holt was channeling the entire buildup of the geothermal eruption, not into a physical explosion, but into a psychic one. A focused, directional blast of pure consciousness. He was not destroying the island. He was uploading himself. The data transfer completed. A single word flashed on the screen: "Done." Lena knew what she had to do. She smashed the console with the butt of the rifle, grabbed a flare gun from an emergency kit, and ran from the module back towards the coast. The light from the drill site faded, the psychic scream cut off. The island fell silent. The director and her team, shaken but alive, stared at the now quiet hole in the ground. Their sensors were dead. The ghost was gone. They had failed. Lena reached the cliffs of the southern shore as dawn broke. She fired the flare gun, its red spark a desperate, hopeful star in the morning sky. She didn't know if anyone was coming. She didn't know what the world would do with the information she had just released. She only knew that she was alive, and she was free. She looked back at the island, at the silent, wounded facility. It was just an island now, a tomb, a monument. Holt was gone. He had sacrificed himself, not just to save her, but to save the world from the weapon he had become. She sat on the edge of the cliff, the pulse rifle across her lap, and waited. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the faint, unfamiliar stirrings of hope. The war was over, and against all odds they had won. Epilogue: The Ghost in the World. 6 months later. The hearing room was cold, sterile, and silent. Lena had sat at a long table, a glass of water untouched before her. She was no longer the haggard castaway in a torn jumpsuit. She wore a simple, dark suit. Her hair was cut short, and her eyes, once wide with terror, were now calm and steady. They held the unnerving stillness of someone who has stared into the abyss and is no longer afraid of what stares back. Across from her sat a panel of stern-faced international arbitrators, military officials, and corporate litigators. For weeks, they had been dissecting the Ethelberg incident. Her testimony, cross-referenced with the mountain of data Holt had leaked, had sent shockwaves through the global power structure. The corporation that had funded Vulture Squad was in ruins, its assets frozen, its executives facing charges of crimes against humanity. The world was reeling from the revelation of what had been created on that small, forgotten island. Dr. Haddad, the lead arbitrator, a severe woman with gray hair, said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room, "Let's go over it one more time. You maintain that in his final moments, Commander Javier Holt did not trigger a physical eruption, but rather a psychic one, that he uploaded his consciousness using the facility's geothermal power." "That is correct," Lena replied, her voice even. "He focused the energy of the eruption into a directional, high-bandwidth transmission of pure data, the consciousness that the prion had created." A corporate lawyer scoffed. "It's a fantastical story, Doctor. A more plausible theory is that your commander simply caused a contained explosion that destroyed the primary evidence, this chorus, and created a massive electromagnetic pulse that wiped your assailant's sensor logs. Your upload is a fiction created by a mind suffering from extreme trauma." "Was the global data leak a fiction?" Lena countered, her gaze unwavering. "Was the collapse of your parent company a result of my trauma? Javier Holt saved my life, and then he saved everyone else's by exposing you. He did it by becoming something more than a man. You can refuse to believe it, but you cannot refute the evidence he provided." The lawyer had no answer. The hearing was a formality. The data leak was absolute. its authenticity verified by a dozen competing intelligence agencies. The world knew. The arbitrator sighed. "Thank you, doctor, you are dismissed." Lena stood, gave a slight nod, and walked out of the room. She was free. She had been debriefed, analyzed, and ultimately cleared. She was a hero to some, a harbinger of a terrifying new age to others. To herself, she was just a survivor. She walked through the marble corridors of The Hague, her footsteps echoing. As she passed a large media screen in the main hall, a news report caught her eye. It was a story about a sudden, inexplicable stock market crash. "Traders are in a panic," the news anchor was saying. "After a ghost crash wiped billions off the market in seconds." The crash was triggered by a series of untraceable, perfectly timed micro-trades that exploited a previously unknown flaw in the global network's high-frequency trading algorithms. Experts are baffled, stating that the complexity and speed of the attack suggest an intelligence far beyond any known human or AI capability. Lena stopped walking. She stared at the screen, at the cascading red numbers, at the panicked faces of the traders. A chill ran down her spine. The company that had owned the Ethelberg facility, the one now in ruins, had been heavily invested in and propped up by a series of powerful, shadowy financial institutions. The very institutions that were now hemorrhaging money in the ghost crash. "I am the containment." Holt's final thought, a memory she had relayed in her testimony. She had thought he meant he was containing the island, but what if he meant something more? Over the next few weeks, the strange events continued. A network of offshore data havens used by rogue states and criminal syndicates was suddenly and inexplicably wiped clean. A tyrannical dictator's hidden financial assets were anonymously transferred to dozens of international aid organizations. An advanced military AI, designed for autonomous warfare, inexplicably shut itself down after its core programming was rewritten with a single, untraceable command: "Thou shalt not kill." The world was changing, not by armies or governments, but by a series of precise, untraceable, and impossibly complex events. A ghost was moving through the world's networks, a silent, invisible warden expanding his mission parameters. He was no longer just guarding an island. He was guarding everything. One evening, Lena was sitting in her small, anonymous apartment, reading a book. Her computer on the desk beside her, which was powered down, suddenly whirred to life. The screen, black for a moment, lit up. A single word appeared in the center in stark block letters. "Hello." Lena stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She slowly reached out, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. A second word appeared beneath the first. "Lena." She typed her reply, her hands trembling slightly. "Hold." There was a pause. The screen flickered. Then a final message appeared. A single sentence that was both a statement and a promise. A reassurance and a terrifying pronouncement of a new world order, governed by a silent, invisible God of his own making. "I'm still on watch." The end.